has constructed a global coalition of think tanks to, in fact, oversee the drive towards the implementation of the SDGs and to create a voice both at the national and global level from civil society to persuade governments and the global community to invest their full commitment to the implementation of the SDGs. We are happy to have with us Mr. Saber Hossain Chowdhury, Member of Parliament, and I would say one of our more enlightened members of Parliament who has been globally engaged in a number of areas relating both to environmental issues and also to the SDGs. Until recently, he was president of the Global Parliamentary Union, and he brought as his final parting gesture as president parliamentarians from around the world to Bangladesh, where, of course, the dominant theme of the discussion was the issues of inequality. And of course, as Mr. Niggli will presumably bring out and we hope to capture in the discussion, the problem will be how do you exercise democratic voice in increasingly unequal societies, and whether in fact functioning political democracy is an important precondition for a strong economic democracy, or vice versa. Can you have a functioning and authentic democracy without strong measures of social and economic inequality? These are thoughts which we will look forward to hear from you. Now, with these words, I'll invite Dr. Fahmida Khatun to say a few words. I would point out over here that CPD is now 25 years old, and one of our primary missions has been to build a consensual response to policy making and policy discussion, where we can bring together the voice of government and opposition, business and civil society, and working class and professional groups to collectively discuss problems. This is a difficult challenge in a society where the political system remains far from consensual. So again, where we would hope to learn from Mr. Niggli is the importance of a strong consensual political process for, in fact, driving a consensual approach to policy making at large. So, Fahmida, please take over for a few minutes, and then we will invite the main speaker. I would like to acknowledge the presence of Mr. Rashed Khan Menon, former minister. He, of course, has a much more long-standing identity as one of the great progressive leaders from his student days. He happened to be my student, and I had the privilege of conducting his viva for the MA examination in the central jail where he was a political prisoner. So he has a long and inherited tradition to bring to this discussion. He is now a member of parliament, but not a minister. All right, Fahmida, you want to say a few words?
I'll just join you to welcome our distinguished guests here, excellencies and dear guests. On behalf of the Center for Policy Dialogue, I would like to join my chairman to welcome you on this to this dialogue. I'll just say a few words on our speaker. There's a piece of paper on your folder, but let me just read it out to you, because he has traveled all the way, as you have heard, all the way from Switzerland to speak on a subject which is very relevant for Bangladesh also. And this is a subject, as the chairman has mentioned, that we deal with this subject every day. This is our daily activities, you can say. And within this SDGs, as you know that goal 16 is very much relevant to the democratic practices, because SDG 16 talks about institutions, governance, security, rule of law. So our speaker will focus on this SDG and many more other SDGs which are relevant to the democratic practices which are constructive to the development of a country. He will focus on a number of SDGs. You can, if you have the presentation, you will see that he will also focus on environmental degradation, sustainable production and consumption, and also rising inequality. All these he will focus on his presentation. But Mr. Peter Niggli has, he brings in a long experience in many fields. He is a Swiss journalist and publicist in the field of development policy, and from 1998 to 2015, he was the Chief Executive Officer of Alliance Sud, the consortium of the largest aid and development organizations in Switzerland. Before that, Mr. Niggli worked as a freelance journalist, focusing mostly on Africa, economics and politics. And from 1990 to 1996, he was a city councilman for the Green Party in Zurich. And in addition to sitting on Helveta's board of directors, he is also a member of the board of trustees of Fassenfar, the Swiss Catholic Lenten Fund, and also ZEWO. Sorry, I don't know what that means. You can tell us about it. He was also a co-founder of the Corporate Responsibility Initiative, and Mr. Niggli is an author and publisher of numerous publications and books on sustainable development policy. Apart from Mr. Niggli, you can see that we have a distinguished set of panelists here. We're absolutely honored and privileged to have you all. And we also have with us the Swiss ambassador, His Excellency Dr. René Holenstein. Apart from that, you have heard that we have Mr. Saber Hossain Chowdhury MP, we have Mr. Rashed Khan MP, we have two very distinguished speakers. One is, of course, our in-house Professor Rounaq Jahan, who is the Distinguished Fellow of CPD, and Dr. Tofail Ahmed. He also needs no introduction. He is currently the Vice Chancellor of Britannia University, Cumilla. So, without further ado, I would like to invite Mr. Peter Niggli to make his presentation. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Let me invite Mr. Peter Niggli to make his presentation.
I'm very glad to be here. I thank for the invitation. You will think, what the hell is with his voice? I've cut out a vocal cord. The voice is like it is now. It doesn't hurt me. It doesn't make pain. It is not tiring. So please go to the words and not to the voice in my presentation now. When the journalists in Switzerland and the politicians were very much concentrated on Switzerland only, realized 2015 that there is something like the SDGs. They always said, how can any government achieve this whole range of goals within this short time? How could they do that? They thought it is not realistic. They found it a little bit ridiculous. That was one of the moods at that time. The question was, wouldn't it be easier for a dictatorial government to push through the SDGs if it doesn't have to take in consideration what the population thinks, and if it can impose the SDGs also against entrenched interests. You see, the question is all. Normally, dictatorial governments and entrenched interests are the same. So they will not push through the SDGs. I'm living in a hyper-democracy. We have a multitude of possibilities of engaging, deciding, and even refusing government decisions. So in our country, the problem is more. Is Switzerland suitable? Will there be a majority of its citizens agreeing to the necessary measures to achieve the SDGs? So I speak about Switzerland more. I have begun to study Bangladesh, but I don't dare to speak about your concrete situation. The first problem, I would say, is Switzerland, as many Western governments, does not take seriously the SDGs. Our governments think, fortunately, the SDGs are only soft law. There is no contract, no mechanism for punishing if you don't achieve something. So we agreed happily, easily, think, let's look later. We do up to now, 4 years later, not have a comprehensive strategy, Swiss strategy, for achieving the SDGs in our country. Generally, Western countries think the SDGs we can achieve without changing significantly our mode of production, consumption, and living. They think drinking water, no problem, we have it. They think good air, no pollution, we already achieved somehow. It's getting worse now, and so on. But they don't go to the real problems of sustainable development. What to do in such a situation in our country? We need democracy. We need the pressure from public opinion and from the civil society. Without that, our government will not develop a strategy, will not propose the necessary measures, and we will never decide democratically about them. Generally, the SDGs are not only a challenge for poor countries, they are a huge challenge for poor countries. But they are also a huge challenge for rich countries. For Western countries, there are 3 central questions. How can we reverse the worldwide ecological degradation? How can we achieve prosperity for every human being in this world, not just for us? We are only 1/7 of the world population. 6/7 live in Asia, Africa, Latin America. And finally, how can we reduce the inequality within our countries and between all countries? When they signed to the SDG 10 inequality, reducing that. Neither the Swiss nor the American, and not to speak of the UK government, thought about what it would mean in our own countries. They thought, you should think about how do you in Bangladesh reduce inequality between the rich and the poor. We have four central problems. The way of living, the way of consumption of the Western countries cannot be globalized. If we globalize it, we would go towards an ecological collapse. Our economy, the one we know, the industrial production, the way of consumption, is not sustainable. We have to change it. Inequality, to reduce it, is very difficult. All the entrenched interests, the ruling groups and classes will push back. Why shall they give up their privileges? It takes for them time. It takes power. It takes struggles. Finally, in our countries, many hope we can deal with these intractable problems by technology, by innovation. We will find the gadgets to somehow achieve a sustainable, highly industrialized economy for up to 10 billion people 2050. Everybody knows there should be, if technology alone is the factor for winning, there should be a rate of innovation that is more than 20 times higher than the present one. It is not possible. In Switzerland, we face a political hurdle race. If we have to decide about concrete measures to reach the SDGs. Some SDGs would need new laws or even constitutional amendments. Will the majority of our citizens and cantons be convinced? For constitutional amendments, we need a popular vote. It's compulsory. And we need a double majority of the citizens and of the member states of our federal state. Citizens can also do something for the SDGs. Parliament, government should do something, but citizens can push them. 100,000 citizens can sign a proposal for an amendment of the Constitution and enforce a popular vote. I know that a coalition of NGOs, trade unions, human rights organizations, environment organizations is preparing a plan for what kind of constitutional amendments are necessary. But they are just in the beginning. Only 11 years left. And if Swiss Parliament adopts a new law which is against the SDGs, 50,000 citizens can compel a popular vote about it. So these are the specialities of Swiss democracy. It doesn't make it easier, but it gives you at least the feeling we could do something. In Bangladesh, I know many SDGs, many NGOs think we can do something, we should do something, are mobilizing around it. Just to illustrate the ecological challenges. And what I said, our mode of life can't be globalized. That is, our figures of the ecological footprint method. They try to measure the biological production per global hectare, meaning per biological productive soils and fisheries for every country and for the world. They measure then the biocapacity of a country it has. You see in the first column, Switzerland has 1, Bangladesh has 0.4, so it has a weaker one. United States, privileged, very strong biocapacity, has most of the American countries. China has 1. The world has 1/6, so not much more than we need. You see in the second column the ecological footprint per person. For these countries I have taken as example. Switzerland is 4.7 points beyond its capacity. The United States beats everybody. Bangladesh is a little bit above of its capacity. China quite much above, and the world too. The last column tells you how much Earth actually the country or water already consuming. If you consume more than 1 Earth, it means you are practically going to the stocks, to the ecological assets. You are slowly destroying them. Switzerland needs actually 3 Earths for our way of life, far beyond what we should do. The States, 5. Okay, we knew it. Far away of what they should achieve. Bangladesh, you live within your possibilities for the time being. But you would like to develop. You would like to have economic growth. For you the question is, what kind of economic growth would be within the ecological limits of our country? China, already 2 worlds. Already 2 worlds. The world is 1.7, already beyond the capacity of renewing the natural renewing of the resources. That's the ecological challenge of the SDGs. The economic challenge you can measure if you look to the inequalities between countries. I compare here the gross national income per head of different countries. Switzerland on top with more than 80,000 current globals in the figures of 2017. At the end, Bangladesh 2047. How shall Switzerland contribute to reduce the inequality between us and Bangladesh? We are for SDG 6, 10, which claims that. What shall we do? What shall the United States do? Which is 6 times more practically than Bangladesh. Not 6 times, much more. You see the average of the world, 10,000, 1/8 of Switzerland. And you see China, the coming superpower, the United States, already beginning to be in Cold War. They are 1/10 of Switzerland, far ahead of Bangladesh, below the world average. So this is the economical challenge. They are 1/10 of Switzerland, far ahead of Bangladesh. I look now to some actions required to achieve several SDGs from a Western viewpoint, not from a poor country viewpoint. SDG 7, ensure access to affordable, sustainable, reliable energy for everybody. In Switzerland, this requires total decarbonization of energy production, of our industrial processes, and of our transportation system. Means cars, trains, planes. SDG 12, ensure sustainable consumption and production patterns. Would mean for the rich countries, how can we degrowth our economies without destroying the economic and social fabric. Our present standard is not, we can't sustain it for the next 100 years. We can't continue. There's a huge debate in the West about the necessary measures. One would be to put the productivity gains into reducing the working hours, into more public services, including care services. Many work which is actually being done by the woman without pay, and into bigger budgets for international aid, development aid, and climate finance. SDG 8, promote inclusive, sustainable economic growth, employment, and decent work for all. I will read SDG 12 and find ways to degrowth the rich economies. Find ways for some growth for the poor countries without destroying their environment and their natural resources. SDG 10, reduce inequality. For poor countries, reform WTO or the international trading rules. There needs to be more policy space for poor countries. No dictate from international organizations how to have to handle a certain protection of your interior markets, nascent industry, and other things. And you regulate cross-border capital transactions. You shouldn't be flooded by speculative capital and risk that it is retired within a few weeks, like it happened, for instance, in the Asian financial crisis some 20 years ago. Finally, SDG 17, revitalize the global partnership. Here, deliver finally the promised climate and development finance. Switzerland is far away of that. We actually spend 0.45, if you're lucky, for development aid. We don't took it seriously until now. The promise for climate finance. From the next year onwards, the rich country should deliver every year $100 billion for adaptation and mitigation measures of poor countries. Actually, it is a small amount of some 100 to 200 million dollars. Switzerland hopes to come away with a very low amount of dollars. If we want to contribute at least somehow to this goal 17, we have to live up to the promises given. So these things is heavy political stuff in our countries, in your countries. It will be also heavy political stuff, different ones. But I speak now about us. In Switzerland, majority of citizens has to agree with the necessary steps. Even if we divide the measures into these steps and decide one after the other, we face a skeptical population, very powerful foes, entrenched interests, and difficult votes. I repeat the question I posed in the beginning. Would a technocratic government without democratic schnick-knack and shackles decide more quickly and easily about it? Could it impose it by decrees? In Switzerland, there are some managers of international corporations who think China can do it better. Could it impose it? They can impose. They have a technocratic government. They have a wise bureaucracy who knows the necessities. If we look concretely to China, we see the problems this strong government has to fulfill SDGs. Since 20 years now, they struggle with that they have good environment laws, but that all the lower levels of the state, of the bureaucracy, of the parties, and of the businesses don't obey these laws. They tried to have a certain measure of protests from below. They lifted a little bit the ban on NGO activities up to the time of Xi Jinping. But when these NGOs began to reach higher levels of the government, they were very unhappy and stopped it again. So China has also problems to reach the SDGs. And they face, as we know, every year, plenty of social protests. They call it mass incidents. Up to a few years ago, there were counted officially between 80 to 100,000 per year. Since Xi Jinping, they don't count anymore officially. Independent researchers come actually to up to 200 mass incidents. So for this kind of government, the problem is, do we need democracy to contain the protests, to somehow put through goals we would like to achieve and to handle a situation which could become dangerous to keep the power in the long time. So I thank you very much. That is the presentation. How about SDGs in Bangladesh? What do you have to do? Is there a plan of the government to achieve the SDGs, a national plan? Is there an administrative structure in regional and local level capable of adapting this plan to regional and local needs? Is there the civil society? Does it have the freedom of maneuver to push for the SDGs? Does the press have the freedom to control what the government is doing, to debate what Parliament is deciding, and to debate the proposed policies? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Niggli, for, in fact, initiating the discussion and exposing the challenges before the global community, and then presenting this as a challenge to Bangladesh. We have, fortunately, with us two major scholars on democracy in Bangladesh, Professor Rounaq Jahan, Distinguished Fellow at CPD, who has recently completed 2 research books on Bangladesh Parliament and the functioning of the political parties. And we have with us Dr. Tofail Ahmed, who has been for many years one of our leading scholars on local government. In fact, most people know him as Mr. Local Government because he is one of the few voices who strongly, in fact, argues for it. They will both make their comments, and then I will invite Mr. Saber Hossain Chowdhury to come in. We'll have about 15 minutes or so for each of you. In fact, argues for it. They will both make their comments, and then I will invite Mr. Saber Hossain Chowdhury to come in. We'll have about 15 minutes.
Thank you very much. Does Saber Hossain Chowdhury has time or he has to rush? Okay, thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank Peter for his excellent presentation. Generally in Bangladesh, we don't get a chance to hear about the experiences of Switzerland. And whenever we talk about democracy, people are more familiar or discuss what is happening in United Kingdom or what is happening in United States. But I think experiences of Europe, particularly experiences of the Nordic countries or Switzerland, I think we should learn how others are, what instruments others are using. So I think this is very helpful. It is also nice to hear about a country where Peter's title was, it is a hyper-democracy. In Bangladesh, where we are suffering from democracy deficits, I think we would not mind living a little bit in a hyper-democracy. We have big differences between Switzerland and Bangladesh. For instance, Bangladesh is an extremely centralized country, and Switzerland is very decentralized, and we all know about Switzerland because of the powers of the cantons and the decentralization. Also, Switzerland is what is known as direct democracy, as opposed to Bangladesh and many other countries which are we know as representative democracy. And we have with us two representatives here. Generally, we think that in a direct democracy, ordinary citizens are much more empowered. And whereas in a representative democracy, our representatives we send to Parliament exercise power on behalf of the citizens. But even in a representative democracy, some of the instruments that are used in a direct democracy, such as referendum or recall or initiative, these also can be used. When Bangladesh framed, we adopted our constitution in 1972. At that time, we thought, followed the British model, and we thought that a flexible constitution, where you can very easily amend the constitution, that would be better for us. But that, at that time, our assumption was that it will not be easy to get a 2/3 majority, that we will have a very robust functioning democracy with the voices of opposition in Parliament. So we were thinking at that time, in fact, our model was England, that we thought there will be norms that you do not have to write down, and that there will be very vibrant multi-party system. But since 2001, Bangladesh, we have seen in Bangladesh Parliament that we had 2/3 majority. And so it has been relatively easy for any ruling party or a government to push through an amendment without much discussion. And amendments have been made very easy. And though we have referendum, provision for referendum only once in, since 1991, we used referendum, and that is when we changed from the presidential to a parliamentary system of government. And in fact, that particular amendment was done with bipartisan support from both the Awami League and the Bangladesh National BNP. And then it was sent to a referendum. So it was working initially for Bangladesh in terms of what Professor Sobhan earlier referred to as consensus building and also bipartisan discussion. But since 2004 and 5, when we started our contestation with election system, starting with Mirpur and Magura, that we are continuously in a downward spiral in terms of bipartisan consensus about important issues or discussion and debate. During 2004 and 5, there was a lot of civil society mobilization in Bangladesh, where we talked about political reforms, introducing certain instruments, such as use of referendum or use of recall or use of initiative, or changing our electoral system with partially PR system. So there was a lot of discussion and debate. But again, since 2009, all this discussion and debates have been, there isn't really much discussion and debate, and people, if people want to talk about political reforms, that almost became a dirty word. So we are right now in a situation where we are pushed back to protecting the very basics of democracy. And you also, Peter, mentioned in your presentation about the very basic of democracy is people's voice. And so I think now protecting the fundamental freedoms, freedom to speech, freedom of assembly, these have become now priority issues here in Bangladesh. Let me turn to the SDGs now and your presentation. In your presentation, you have prioritized 5 SDGs as priority from the Swiss perspective. and you have referred to some actions to realize those. And I think, if I have to sort of sum this up, I think from the Western countries' perspective, what is very high in their mind is the issue of ecology and climate change. But others sort of are not so high. And I think it is because you are also suffering from some of the effects of climate change. I hear that in Paris or France, now so many people have died because of the heat wave. So whatever pinches the citizens, then that becomes somehow priority. Sort of one of the issues I want to bring it here, questions I have, is what are the Western countries really willing to do, citizens, in terms of taking a cut on their consumption patterns, whether they can, their consumption is not sustainable. And there, I think, it is easy to always vilify other countries. And in your presentation, you also mentioned what China is doing. But the biggest culprit is USA. And what can the European countries do in terms of putting some pressure on the United States? If anybody has to cut back, then it is the United States which has to take the initiative. And as you know, they don't even now have their backtrack from that. I will now try to respond to your question, what about Bangladesh and the priorities from Bangladesh perspective. As far as we are concerned, or as far as I am concerned, from my perspective, I cannot prioritize only a few SDGs. All 17 SDGs are important for us. And I don't consider that you can separate them. I find that all the SDGs, all 17 are interrelated, integrated, and they have to go together. You cannot just sort of cherry pick one and not the others. So I cannot say that, okay, we will end poverty and hunger, but we won't bother about quality education or quality health or water and sanitation. But if you push me to say where, from my personal perspective, where I put priority or what SDG I consider to be very central to the achievement of all other SDGs in Bangladesh, then I will say it is goal 16. Because that is where we talk about strengthening institutions, that is where we talk about ensuring justice, that is where we talk about rule of law. So if we want to perform better in terms of either poverty reduction or inequality or reducing hunger, then I think what we would need to do, or if we believe in not leaving anybody behind, then unless we build strong institutions to deliver services impartially, unless we can ensure justice, unless we can ensure fundamental freedoms for people who are left behind to organize and voice their demands, we are not going to be able to push on any other things. So for me, goal 16 is not only an integral goal in itself for uplifting people's quality of life, but it is also instrumental in terms of performing on other goals. Unfortunately, in Bangladesh, over the years, we have seen erosion in rule of law, erosion in terms of strengthening of institutions, erosion in terms of fundamental freedoms. If you look at all the global indicators that are used by various international institutions that have produced these indicators of voice or indicators of corruption control or indicators of rule of law, then you will find since 1990s we never did very well either on corruption control, or we never did very well in terms of rule of law. Those never increased. And what is alarming is that we were from the early 1990s, we were doing gradually better in voice indicators. Now that also is declining. So I think that we need to really, if we are serious, my bottom line is, if we are serious about achieving SDGs, then we have to really work on SDG 16. So I think that we so then the title of our seminar or discussion today is Democratic Practices for Achieving SDGs. As I mentioned before, that I do not consider that, again, you can separate out some democratic practices from other practices, because all the various elements of democracy either go together or they don't go at all. So, but of all the various practices, people can talk about various practices. I see the ambassador has mentioned certain practices, for instance. For me, I will flag 5 practices that I find to be very critical. For me, the top of the list is fundamental freedoms that we used to call as civil and political rights. The right of free speech, media, assembly, these are very critical. Then the second is rule of law, that we will live in a rule-based system and not personality-based systems, and institutions need to be strengthened. Third, if we want to talk about SDGs, then I think we need to talk about inclusion, participation, because we find that even in a democratic system, even in a highly affluent Western country, there are excluded groups. There is discrimination. So unless you take inclusion, if you believe in not leaving anybody behind, then we have to then think of inclusion and participation. Fourth is transparency, and that is 2 issues that we have been discussing in Bangladesh. One is data, that you really need to produce and respect authentic data, that policies have to be not only rule-based, but to have any rule-based policies, you really need authentic data that everybody will accept. If somebody gives of course I know we live in the West now, in the Trump world, where then there is no truth and there is alternative facts. But I think up to now we were used to believing in integrity of data and right to information for all citizens. Because we have come out of colonial systems where really anything important was always stamped as secret and confidential. And if something is not stamped as secret and confidential, then it was not very important. And it is very difficult to get out of that mindset. And the final is accountability. That people's representatives, and not only people's representatives, anybody in authority, whether we are talking about an academic institutions like the university or an NGO or media, everybody has to be accountable for their own behavior. And so let me now just conclude by making one appeal, and I take the opportunity of the presence of 2 members of parliament here, that we have stopped any discussion and debate about need for certain political reforms, whether we could experimentally introduce some of these instruments, such as which are practiced in other countries, such as even Nepal has part PR system, part the majoritarian, part first past the post system, so that we can introduce certain kinds of reforms in various institutions, political reforms that would address some of the problems that we face in Bangladesh in creating certain consensus. And I think that some of these kinds of discussions and debates, the members of parliament who belong to the ruling party and the ruling alliance, they are better placed really to initiate that kind of a discussion and create an atmosphere again when we can again talk and debate in a very civil manner about the various alternative instruments that can be used to improve the quality of our politics. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Jahan. Let me now invite Professor Tofail Ahmed. 15 minutes, Tofail.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Respected Professor Rehman Sobhan, Chair of this session, Mr. Saber Hossain Chowdhury, MP, Mr. Rashed Khan Menon, MP, His Excellency Dr. René Holenstein, Ambassador of Switzerland in Bangladesh, and Peter Niggli, who was the keynote speaker today, and lastly, Professor Rounaq Jahan in the dais, and the distinguished audience. I was a little bit puzzled by looking at the title on which I should speak, democracy or SDG, or connect to. And again, Switzerland and Bangladesh. So it's a great dilemma to decide where to emphasize. My problem has been solved by Professor Rounaq Jahan. I totally agree with her regarding the SDG and the democracy of what she said. So it's made my job a little bit easier. Because my Swiss experience is only confined within this book, Wolf Linder, Professor Wolf Linder, and 15 days study visit in 2011. But still I feel comfortable to talk about Swiss democracy. But I was born, brought up and everything in Bangladesh, breathe, eat, walk, everything. But I feel shaky to talk about Bangladeshi democracy. That's the dilemma. So let me start this way, as Professor Rehman Sobhan in his introductory note said, functional democracy. The title of this seminar started, what type of democratic practices are suitable for achieving the SDGs. The answer already we got. Functional democracy is one of the essential elements for having SDG effectively implemented. So question and answer is very easy. In between there are a lot of problems. So if we look at the presentation on Switzerland, Peter brought a few challenges for Switzerland, and I think these challenges are equally applicable for other developed countries as well. Maybe our challenges are very different. I'll come to that later. Swiss democracy is active, direct, deliberative, participatory, and consensus democracy. So within that framework, when they think the implementation of SDG, they are encountering a lot of challenges. It is also a country where in election, PR system, proportional representation system is functional for many, many years. This is a country and system where the longest serving coalition government in the world. They have the experience of longest serving coalition government, consensus government. Still they are saying that for many, many years it is not very easy to implement SDGs. In our case, we also have democracy in our own way. Democracy is not one and the only system practiced in one single country. We have our democracy in our own way. Within that democracy, I should say, the system we developed, the system Switzerland developed is consensus, deliberative, active, participatory democracy. Many other executives are there. In our case, our model can be encapsulated as dominant executive model. Executives has the last say, first say and last say in our system. So that's a great difference. And another feature of our democracy is the majoritarian system. Minorities miserably marginalized in the system. Minority is miserably marginalized. Elections are stage managed. Voters conspicuously remain absent en masse. So what a contrast. Still, what I believe, within our system, SDG implementation is less problematic. We can implement SDG because it's executive model. What order is issued, that will be carried out. And at the end also, we are some sort of a nation of tailors. We can make anything and everything according to the order you made. So we can make the things. Within the executive model, that is possible. So we have less problem than Switzerland in implementing SDG. There are challenges, I will come to that later. In our democracy, we have been executivizing the opposition, quote, official opposition, unquote. So our opposition is official opposition. In our democracy, it's only unique in Bangladesh. And sometimes they are more Catholic than the Pope, the opposition. This speaks for government in a more pronounced way than the members of the government party. That's our opposition. We have a coalition government too, which is based on the principles of subordination and some sort of unconditional surrender to the ruling regime. So Swiss coalition and Bangladesh coalition, Swiss opposition and Bangladesh opposition, voting system, both are very different, but we both are having democracy. I'm not looking at my left and only right because nobody is there. So within this particular system, if we come back to the SDG, in our case, we implemented MDG as well, Millennium Development Goal. So still we have more than 10 years to implement SDG. I am very hopeful that Bangladesh will achieve most of the SDGs except one, 16. 16 is the most important challenge for Bangladesh. Other SDGs could be achieved because we are the nation of tailors, we can make it. Whatever size you say, whatever fashion you order, we can make it. Even reports and returns and data and everything, we can do it. So maybe 16 also, officially we can have, we can achieve. Maybe the qualitative and other things may differ. So challenge is 16. Our most important challenge will be the SDG number 16. I do not know how to get to that point, all the indicators of the 16. I'm not sure and I do not know. Professor Rounaq Jahan provided some direction towards that. I agree with her. I endorse the views. I do not know how to get to that point. I was requested by our journalist friends to speak some Bangla as well. So if Mr. Chair permits me, ওকে, আমি যেটা বলতে চাচ্ছি, সুইজারল্যান্ডের ডেমোক্রেসিটা এটা আর বাংলাদেশের ডেমোক্রেসির মধ্যে অনেকগুলো ডিফারেন্স আছে। সুইস ডেমোক্রেসিটাকে আমরা অংশগ্রহণমূলক, ডেলিবারেটিভ, অ্যাক্টিভ, কনসেনসাস, ঐক্যমত্যের গণতন্ত্র, এগুলো এইভাবে আমরা ফিচারাইজ করতে পারি। বাংলাদেশে আসলে আমরা ঠিক এটাকে এক্সিকিউটিভ মডেল বলতে চাচ্ছি। এক্সিকিউটিভ মডেলটা হচ্ছে যারা এক্সিকিউটিভ আছে তাদেরই সিদ্ধান্তটাই প্রথম সিদ্ধান্ত এবং শেষ সিদ্ধান্ত একটাই হয়, প্রথম কথা এবং শেষ কথা একরকমই হয়। সুতরাং আমাদের জন্য, সুইজারল্যান্ডের জন্য বলা হচ্ছে চ্যালেঞ্জ, বিকজ তাদেরকে সংবিধান সংশোধন করতে হবে কোনো কোনো ক্ষেত্রে, আইন পরিবর্তন করতে হবে যদি এসডিজি পুরোপুরি ইমপ্লিমেন্ট করতে হয়। কিন্তু আমাদের ক্ষেত্রে, আমাদের এক্সিকিউটিভ মডেলে আমাদের জন্য ইজিয়ার। আমাদের ল, কনস্টিটিউশন এগুলো তোয়াক্কা করার দরকার নেই। আর আমাদের কনস্টিটিউশন এত লিবারাল, ওখানে সব কিছুই আছে, আমরা যে কোনো সময় যে কোনোভাবে এটা ব্যাখ্যা করে ওই জায়গায় নিয়ে আসতে পারি। এবং আমি বলতে চাই, আমরা একটা দর্জি নেশনের কাছাকাছি আসি, কারণ গ্রামে রপ্তানি করি, বানাই, আমরা সব কিছু বানিয়ে নিতে পারি। এই ক্ষেত্রে চ্যালেঞ্জের মধ্যে আমি যেটা বলতে চাচ্ছি, একমাত্র 16টা, যেখানে ডেমোক্রেসি, এই সুশাসন, অনেক কিছু জিনিস বলা আছে, ওখানে বোধহয় আমাদের একটু সমস্যা আছে। আমি আর একটু বিস্তারিত করলে এটা বলতে চাই যে আমাদের যে ডেমোক্রেসি, এটা বলি না ইংরেজিতে, বাংলাও বলি, পরে ইংরেজিতে হয়তো পারলে বলবো। সুইস মডেলটা হচ্ছে, যদি আমরা, এখন তো ক্রিকেট চলছে, এটা খুব বেশি দেখি আমরা, এখন অন্য খবর খুব একটা দেখি না, ক্রিকেট নিয়ে খুব বেশি পাগল থাকি। তো ক্রিকেট মডেল যদি বলেন ডেমোক্রেসি, এটা কিন্তু সুইজারল্যান্ড। কারণ ওখানে পজিশন, যদি ধরেন ব্যাটিং টিম পজিশনে থাকে, অপোজিশনে বোলিং টিম থাকে, এই বোলিং টিম আবার নির্দিষ্ট ওভারের পরে কিন্তু ব্যাটিংয়ে আসবে, এর মধ্যে কোনো ব্যর্থই নেই। 50 ওভার শেষ, আপনি যাই করেছেন রান, এখন আসেন ব্যাটিং করতে, আসলেন, তাহলে আপনি বোলিং ব্যাটিং কিন্তু দুইটাই সমান দক্ষতার সাথে করতে পারলে আপনি জিতবেন। এটা সুইস মডেল। আমাদেরটা হচ্ছে ফুটবল মডেল। আমাদেরটা ফুটবল মডেল। ফুটবল মডেলের মধ্যে আবার একটু ডিফারেন্স আছে। ডিফারেন্সটা কি? আপনি ইচ্ছা মতো গোল পোস্ট চেঞ্জ করতে পারেন, কোন পোস্টে গোল দিবেন এটা আপনি ডিসাইড করতে পারেন। তারপরে হচ্ছে যে রেফারি, আপনি খেলবেন, রেফারি হতে পারবেন, দুটোই করতে পারবেন। তাহলে মোটামুটি এইটা খুব ইজি। আপনি খেলবেন, আপনি রেফারি হবে, এবং আবার আরো সুবিধা হচ্ছে আপনি খেলবেন, কোনো অপোনেন্ট থাকবে না, মাঠ খালি, ওয়াক ওভার এক ধরনের। এই 3টা ফুটবল মডেল আবার আমাদের, ওই ফুটবল মডেলের মধ্যে আবার কিন্তু আপনি এখানে 3টা আছে নতুন ফিচার। এই ডেমোক্রেসির মধ্যে কিন্তু এসডিজি ইমপ্লিমেন্টেশন খুব ইজি। আমি আর বেশি সময় নিতে চাই না, এখানে অনেক ডিস্টিংগুইশড পারসনস আছে, বিশেষ করে হিজ এক্সেলেন্সি ডক্টর রেনে হোলস্টেইন আছেন। উনি বলবেন বাংলাদেশের লোকাল ডেমোক্রেসিতে তারা অনেক সাপোর্ট দিয়েছেন, এবং আমরা অনেকে কাজ করেছি, এবং এগুলো অনেকগুলো খুব ভালো ভালো বিষয় আইনে অন্তর্ভুক্ত করা হয়েছে, কিন্তু ইমপ্লিমেন্টেশনে যাচ্ছে না, ইমপ্লিমেন্টেশনে কেউ পিছিয়ে যাচ্ছে। আমাদের আইনগুলো কিন্তু খুব খারাপ না, যে এক্সিস্টিং সিস্টেমের মধ্যে আমাদের যে আইনগুলো আছে, আইনগুলো কিন্তু মোরাললেস, এগুলো দিয়ে ভালো কাজ করা সম্ভব। এবং এখানে সুইজারল্যান্ড গভর্নমেন্টের বেশ কিছু অবদান আছে, আমি সেটা স্বীকার করছি, এবং তারা আরো ভবিষ্যতে আমাদেরকে হেল্প করবেন সে আশাও করছি। What I am saying, His Excellency, I hope you will be talking about local democracy, the support you have provided to the local government. For Your Excellency, what I am saying, the contribution you made to our system, it was excellent. We appreciate, and it worked. And many of the laws were changed on the basis of, or with the help of your assistance and other donors as well. A lot of assistance were given, and the law we are having are functional. If we make it functional, still we can work in many cases. So thank you very much for that, and I hope that you will be continuing supporting us in those areas. Regarding the MDG, another challenge I like to say regarding the local governance, local government as well, and I'll finish my discussion. One was, I said, 16 is the great challenge for Bangladesh. Also, now the SDG has been nationalized. government and NGOs both have taken it very seriously, positively. Government has made a lot of initiatives. In every ministry, there are some goals. They have owned it. They are trying to pursue it. And similarly, the forum organized under CPD is also working with NGOs. So that's all right. So nationalization is complete to some extent. But I think as SDG need localization as well. If SDG can be localized, because all the democratically organized local governance institutions, if they own it, it will be more easier to achieve. But we never thought, we never try to localize this type of goals, because even MDG, we tried to localize, we could not. Now, in case of SDG, I would urge upon all the activists as well as the government executives, try to localize the SDGs, because your Upajala Parishad, your Paura Sabha and City Corporation, your Union Parishad, all of them has to absorb the idea of SDG in their own programs. Then it will be easier for the government. So you will have a lot of democratic institutions to put their efforts and resources for achieving SDG. It will be easier for the government to accelerate the achievement of implementation of SDG. So localization is one of the big challenges. Regarding the local government, in one SDG, local government is mentioned. But unfortunately, that local government is urban local government. They clearly mentioned about the urban, but Bangladesh and many other countries, developing countries, we have rural local government as well. That is totally forgotten. But in Bangladesh case, if we localize and nationalize the SDG, we have to keep in mind that we are not like Western countries, we are not only having single system of local government, which is urban local government. We have rural local government as well. So when channelizing resources, making policies, that has to be kept in mind. I tried to remind it to the people who are visiting United Nations. আমাদের যে এমডিজিতে একটা গোল আছে যেখানে লোকাল গভর্নমেন্টকে এমফাসাইজ করা হয়েছে, কিন্তু সেই লোকাল গভর্নমেন্ট কিন্তু এমডিজির মধ্যে রয়ে গেছে নগরের স্থানীয় সরকারের কথা। কারণ যেহেতু যারা তৈরি করেছেন তাদের দেশে কিন্তু আর লোকাল গভর্নমেন্ট রুরালে নাই, কিন্তু আমার আনফর্চুনেটলি আমাদের যাদের রুরাল লোকাল গভর্নমেন্ট আছে তারা তো ওখানে ছিলেন, তারা কেউ কিন্তু এরা মেনশন করে নাই, ফলে ওই জিনিসটা ইনক্লুসিভ হয় নাই। এটা যদি পলিসির মধ্যে আমরা এই জিনিসটাকে সামনে রেখেই মুখস্থ পলিসি নিয়ে ফেলি তাহলে কিন্তু ভুল করব। সেই জন্য আমাদের যে রুরাল লোকাল গভর্নমেন্ট সিস্টেমটা আছে এটা যেন আমরা ভুলে না যাই, এই কথাটা আমি রিমাইন্ড করে দিয়ে এসডিজির এই দুটো চ্যালেঞ্জের কথা বলে আমি আমার বক্তব্য শেষ করছি। আমাকে ফর ইনভাইটিং মি, আই এক্সপ্রেস মাই গ্র্যাটিটিউড টু CPD and other organizers as well. Thank you very much for patient hearing.
Now I will bring in Mr. Saber Hossain Chowdhury. He has to leave, so his concluding remarks at the end of the session will be made by his fellow Member of Parliament, Mr. Rashed Khan Menon. Both Saber and Menon have the advantage that they have been on both sides of the political fence for a long period, struggling for democracy, and then in office at the other side of the fence with a rather different perspective towards the functioning of the democratic process. Saber, of course, has the advantage that he chairs a very important parliamentary committee which is central to the SDGs relating to the environment, and himself is passionately engaged in environmental issues. So it will be very helpful for us to understand how he will reconcile the challenge of meeting SDG goals with the functioning of our democratic processes in practice. So it will be very helpful for us to understand.
Thank you. Let me first thank CPD for organizing this event, and also congratulate Professor Rehman Sobhan and the team They feel a vacuum in the politics of Bangladesh, which I think is very important, the issue of policy. Because quite often we are very much enthusiastic about what needs to be done, but how that is going to be done is always a challenge. So it's not the what, it's the how. And this is, I think, where CPD contributes enormously to our understanding. This change in batting order with me coming in the middle poses some challenges for me, because there's also, other than the keynote speech from Peter Niggli, two very experienced, I would say, thought provokers in the domain of policy and politics in Bangladesh. They have also spoken. Let me try and approach this from a slightly different perspective. Yes, Dr. Tofail talked about, how is he going to reconcile democracy and SDGs. He was confused with that aspect. And I think the way we try to reconcile that is to say that there is a singular focus on people. I mean, if you look at the SDGs are essentially about the 5 Ps. You have the people in the center, and then you have peace, you have prosperity, you have the planetary boundaries that Peter talked about, and of course you have the other dimension of partnerships. And even if you look at the UN, the charter to the UN begins with the words, "We the people." So I think the people is where the whole thing comes together. And the big challenge for us, yes, we can look at democracy in different contexts, how it is working in Switzerland, how it might work in Bangladesh, but the fundamental question, I think, is, are we going to be able to open up public policy making? That is the fundamental aspect. And I think the SDGs, and especially the implementation of the SDGs, give us a very unique opportunity to redefine, to even re-energize the relationship between citizens and the state, and how we can then bring about a transformation. I think that is the fundamental aspect that we really talk about. And when we talk about the types of democracy, I think there are 2 aspects. One is whether we call it hyper-democracy or other types of democracy. What is important is democracy has to be participatory. And that doesn't mean just at the election level. Elections are important, but what happens in between elections is even more important. So I think that's where Bangladesh should also focus. Yes, elections are an important part of democracy, but they are not a sufficient condition for democracy to thrive and prosper. The other aspect of democracy is whether it actually delivers. Does democracy deliver? And I think these are the 2 questions and the 2, if you like, the framework that we are going to be talking about today. Now, in terms of Bangladesh, yes, we do have challenges. No one is saying that this is a perfect country, it functions well. There have also been a lot of progress. And I think what we have to look at is how we can progress better, how we can have more inclusive growth, which I think is very important. If we look at the GDP growth, it is fantastic. 8.2, it will probably be 10% in the coming years. But rather than look at numbers, I think what is important is we have to look at the quality of growth that we have in Bangladesh. It's the quality of growth. And there, if we talk about inequality, and I was talking about this in my budget speech the other day, there are 2 aspects. Of course, there is consumption inequality, there is inequality of opportunities, the gender dimension. But if you look at it in strictly economic terms, we have the challenge of income inequality. So if you look at the bottom 5%, if you look at the top 5%, the difference is actually increasing. So the bottom 5 are actually getting poorer and the top 5 are getting richer. That's not my conclusion, that is what the Bangladesh Bureau of Statistics are telling us. What is even more worrisome is the fact that if you look at wealth inequality, it is even more. So one is the most extreme form of inequality, if you look at Gini coefficients, and 0 is, of course, no inequality. And in the case of wealth, it is over 0.72%. And that is probably understated, because in Bangladesh, we try to divide our wealth in terms of personal wealth and business wealth. A lot of the personal wealth is camouflaged in the business wealth. So if you take that into account, this inequality is actually going to increase a lot more. So that is a fundamental challenge for Bangladesh. It's not just development, it is sustainable development. That is why we have the SDGs. So are we going to have a model of economic growth which is going to sustain over a period of time? I think that is a fundamental question that we have to look at. If you look at other economies, when there is growth, you expect that growth to be reflected in rising employment. Not happening so much in Bangladesh. So why do we have this scenario where unemployment is fairly constant and yet our growth continues to go through the roof? To what extent is our education system fit for purpose in terms of producing graduates who are actually going to be useful and it is going to be consistent with the demands that we have? So these are all very fundamental issues. Even if we look at the unemployment rate, what is again very worrying is the fact that those who have primary education, and this is data that I actually got from CPD for my budget discussion, those who have attained primary level education, their rate of unemployment is about 2.7%. But if you look at those who have received tertiary level education, the unemployment rate is 11.7%. That again is one of the paradoxes of the growth of Bangladesh, because it means the more educated you are, the more likely it is that you are going to remain unemployed. So I think it's important that we understand those dynamics, why that is happening. And of course, goal 16, when we talk about the SDGs following on from the MDGs, there are two words that we use to describe the SDGs. One is, it's very inspirational. Zero poverty, zero hunger, decent work for all, no inequality. So it's very aspirational from that point of view. But where the transformative part comes in is, I think, SDG 16. Because that is going to be the engine, that is going to be the driver of the other 16 goals that we have. So it's not just a goal in itself, as Professor Rounaq Jahan has mentioned, it is also an enabler when it comes to achieving the other goals. I don't agree with Dr. Tofail on this subject. I think if we don't achieve SDG 16, we are not going to achieve the other goals. It's not like we will achieve the others and we are going to be behind in SDG in overall terms. So I think this is fundamental. And this is where, of course, the real challenges are. How do you measure peace? What indicators are there to measure peace? How do you measure the efficacy and the effectiveness of institutions? Very, very challenging. But it does talk about participation and it does talk about decision making. When we look at Peter Niggli's presentation, he talked about articulation of policies and whether a government which is not inclined towards democracy can actually deliver better. It might in terms of formulation of the policies. But I think when it comes to implementation, unless you are able to redefine this relationship between citizen and state, whether people are actually going to decide for themselves, it's not going to work. So if you look at what has happened in the past, and we look at the context of global challenges, the top-down system simply doesn't work. The control command system approaches, they don't work. So what we are really talking about, which is goal 17, is a new dimension in the partnership between the citizen and the state. I think that is absolutely fundamental. And whether you are in Switzerland or whether you are in Bangladesh, unless we redefine that relationship, unless we re-energize that relationship, unless we give it a new context and a new depth, we are not going to be able to meet the challenges of the SDGs. Yes, to what extent is Bangladesh Parliament functional? Before we talk about functional democracies, we have to look about the Parliament of Bangladesh itself. And I think there are changes. For instance, we are now talking about valuing household work that women do. This has been a big issue for discussion. This is now being discussed in the Parliament of Bangladesh. And specifically when it comes to the environment, the other issue where we have already started work is how do we put a value to the services that we get from nature. There's a lot of services that we get from ecosystems. Nature provides a lot of services free. So can we add a value to these services? Because unless you are able to put a value, you are not able to measure. So when we talk about environmental degradation, one of the areas that the Parliament of Bangladesh is now looking at is how can we pick up this concept of, I think it's referred to as STEEB, the economics of ecosystems and biodiversity. So there is a lot of work that is being done. Yes, it would be nice to have a much more vibrant parliament where the opposition views are also there. And opposition not just for the sake of opposition. I think what we are looking at is constructive debate and how we can put all the minds together to reach a better conclusion and have a better consensus. So the SDGs, I think, are going to be important, not just in terms of the focus on people, but also in terms of to what extent can democracy deliver the SDGs. I think this is a very fundamental question that we have. And more than any time in the past, we have a singular focus in terms of the global goals. That was not there before. Of course, the MDGs didn't have the aspect about planetary boundaries. It didn't talk about the environment in so detail, so we have goals 13, 14, and 15. I agree that all of the goals are important for Bangladesh. And I think what is going to be important is not just to look at statistics, but look at the qualitative aspects, because that is really going to be addressing the basic spirit of the SDGs, which is leaving no one behind. So if you want to take that up as your starting point, you have to identify who are the communities, who are the vulnerable groups, who are the people who are in risk of being left behind. And are the policies that we are coming up with, are the budgetary allocations that we come up with, are they going to make sure that these people, in fact, are not left behind? When we started off the SDGs, we talked about the unfinished business of the MDGs. And I hope that when we come to the end of the SDGs, there won't be any unfinished business, because otherwise the unfinished business is going to go to a point where it is going to define whatever post-SDG agreements that we reach. So we can't leave too much behind. We have to play catch-up in terms of making sure that we are up to speed on what we have not achieved and achieving them, and also moving forward with the times. Just an insight and a footnote. When we were talking about SDG 16, and at that time I was president of the Inter-Parliamentary Union, initially we came up with a goal of democratic governance. So that's how SDG 16 was initially conceived. It was democratic governance. Somewhere in the process we lost the D word because some countries were not comfortable with it. And then we were left with just governance. But I think still the fact that governance has been acknowledged is a big step forward. And how we really impact on the quality of the lives that we represent is of course going to be an overarching challenge. Peter, thank you for your deliberations. I found the two provisions that you talked about, that with a referendum where 50,000 people, or even a petition, where 50,000 people sign a petition, you can actually raise your objections and then ask for a referendum. So I think that should not be just for the SDGs, it should be for any law in the country. In the case of Bangladesh, we have to talk about higher numbers because 50,000 is something I can organize in one constituency. So of course we have to talk about higher numbers. But I think that is a very interesting element that we have been exposed to today. I wish I could have listened to the discussions in the open session because one of the beauties of coming to these events of the CPD is that you actually learn a lot. So I don't really come to speak, it is really to understand and to also try to enhance our capacities. We are not Mr. Know-alls, we have a lot to learn and we learn as we go along. But thank you for this very interesting event. I think it also opens up our minds to other possibilities. In terms of the global footprint, Bangladesh is still within the sort of boundaries, the planetary boundaries. But the rate at which we are going, the rate at which we are burning coal and setting up power plants, I think we are going to cross that planetary boundary fairly soon. So while we take comfort in the fact that we have not yet crossed those boundaries, it should not be a time for us to wallow and say that we are doing well. I think there is a lot of room for improvement on that also. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Saber, for your very thoughtful and sort of challenging observations, which were made with considerable candor and should in fact guide the discussion from the floor. I'm sorry he will not be able to be with us over here, but we will look forward to welcoming him back to follow up on some of these questions. I think the central element that he himself will have to deal with in the two hats that he wears, one on the issue of inequality, where he had great exposure in the IPU, and now in his chair of the Parliamentary Committee on Environment, is the tension of unequal elite-driven system, which in fact can monopolize the resources of nature, frequently, in our case, in violation of the rule of law, and is then not adequately held accountable within the system and does so with a degree of impunity. Here, how the instruments of democracy, including Parliament itself, can make such abuses of environmental resources, including the grabbing of lands, the grabbing of our water resources in their constant pollution, into measures of accountability before Parliament, is, I hope you will, as Chairman of the Parliamentary Committee on Environment, perhaps use your authority to actually see what you could actually do about that. Because it is one thing to speak the language of the SDGs, and the other to have an alternate reality going on the ground, where every day you are seeing various forms of abuses, where water systems are being progressively eroded and lands are being usurped by people with resources. So in fact, actually the management of the environment itself is becoming highly unequal. So we look forward to you in your role as chairman of the committee to bring such people to account.
Maybe I'll hear the first comments of the...
Okay, let's open up the discussion. He's staying here for a few more minutes. Who would we want to bring in first? Atiq, you want to open the batting? Few minutes, please. We have a lot of others to be brought in.
Thank you very much for putting me on the spot. I've been a bit late and missed quite a bit of the discussion, but delighted to be here. The question of the SDGs, which is for the first time combined natural resource system with economic system and our long-term view and vision, not only of the country. One of the greatest assets of SDGs is that for the first time there has been a global participation in outside the usual UN type system, where all countries, rich and poor, have to submit SDG reports. So MDG was exclusively poor countries. SDG is for everybody. So it does bring in an opportunity for expanding and being fair, because the employment world today for the young generation isn't Bangladesh only, it's global employment they're looking at. So the whole, and the point that Saber Chowdhury has rightly made on ecological system, our environmental limits are being obviously established. And this was always known, but nobody could see it so clearly and obviously. One of the most recent learning is that if each country of the world individually wants to do the best for its people, and does a plan which is optimal for each country, and you add them all together, the planet cannot take it. Whether it's the atmosphere, we know the ocean is so saturated that by 2030 there will be more plastic weight per weight than the living organisms in the ocean. And the atmosphere will not be able to take it. It's just tiny molecules that's creating havoc through extreme events. And very recently, one of the findings is what is called, we have been talking about climate justice, one of the gravest challenge of justice for the planet. Now it has been called climate apartheid because it is the rich who will be able to withstand some of the extreme events, while the poor will have to pay a price with their lives and livelihood as well as ecosystemic collapse. So the democratic practices enable us to help those decisions within a country. And if we can have democratic practices within the global system, it would be even better, but as we know, we don't. So I don't want to get to the whole democratic practice, but more on the achieving the SDGs. Bangladesh has been doing reasonably well. One of the greatest challenge of an effort like SDG for each country is coordination. How to coordinate the multiplicity of challenges that come from it. Bangladesh has been doing rather better in this and involving each and every ministry as well as subsequently the other organs, the secondary partner and the tertiary partner, including civil society, scientific community and input. So in that sense, it's doing well. One of the tragedies of coordination is that everybody wants to coordinate, nobody wants to be coordinated. So that challenge has to be overcome, and there has been some serious effort towards that. Nonetheless, the challenges are enormous because at one level we want economic growth, at the same time we want employment for everybody, and without destroying the ecosystem potential that we have. Now, ecosystem practices has been such that there are a number of research. One very big research initiative that has happened more recently is called ESPA, Ecosystem Services for Poverty Alleviation. And about 200 research grants have been given, about $50 million research over a period. And I had to chair the International Advisory Board, and what we learned is not necessarily a very pleasant lesson. The lesson is that the people, the scientists who come from ecosystemic sciences, the natural resource type use, for them, they don't understand poverty that well. So instead of, though the title of the project was Ecosystem Services for Poverty Alleviation, what they ended up doing is ecosystem services and poverty alleviation. They could not combine the causal relationship that easily. So to understand, for example, in a flood in Bangladesh, we have identified 21 types of vegetable that emerges during the flood, which can reach the poor people and meet some of their nutritional needs. If we wanted to give that much of nutritional need through projects and, say, World Bank project, it would cost them huge amount of money and impossible to give within that system. So nature does provide those opportunities. The question is, can we optimize those opportunities? Can we take it to the right people in the right places? Nature is pretty open. It's not well, it doesn't choose between people and communities. It just provides, and then the community has to go and find out where the resources are. So without taking it much further, it would be extremely important to integrate for the long term in SDGs achievement, both the economic system and ecological system, and see the relationship. And for us, poverty alleviation remains supreme priority for all political parties. Two areas in which political parties have not differed at all in Bangladesh. One is poverty alleviation, other is climate change. So, and these are two vital challenges for Bangladesh. So politically, party-wise, there isn't a difference or challenges. It's a question of process of getting there. And those are the two major challenges that we have to face. And unfortunately, they reinforce each other. Climate change will increase poverty. There has been absolute decrease in poverty in the globe, but climate change and conflict, these two are causing new emergence of poverty across the world. So we have to be taken seriously. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity.
Thank you, Atiq. Okay.
Thank you. My name is Tofail. I teach peace and conflict studies in the department in the University of Dhaka, and I currently chair the department. It's interesting to learn all these things, that how democratic practices could be connected with the implementation of the SDG goals. But to me, it looks like that I'm sure that we are not trying to harmonize democratic practices, because there are different types of democratic practices across the world. And when we consider it from a global perspective, and as Saber Hossain Chowdhury, MP, he highlighted that in the global political level, we have seen that it's not the global democratic governance, rather it comes about institutional capacity building, because there is a high political issues at a global level. We cannot undermine that. And in that sense, and we have seen different patterns of democracy in Swiss and majoritarian, minoritarian things in Westminster system, and we have seen in the USA system, and many other pocket democracies in different places. So again, I'm trying to look at that. When we talk about democratic practices, we are not talking to harmonize all these things together. Rather, we are focusing on the context. What the context permit to ensure democratic functioning of the institutions. Perhaps that is important to connect for SDGs, because in many contexts, perhaps in different other continents, democratic practices perhaps differs from Western world and even Eastern parts of the world. So in that sense, I often focus on the context rather than the pattern of democracy that is important. And because it is often connected with two issues, connected with democracy, democratic election, and pre-election and post-election issues of peace, stability, and other issues. Because if we often talk about the patterns, which one is number one, number two, and if we try to categorize in that manner, perhaps we are going in a wrong direction, rather than we need to focus on the context sensitivity and sensitivity of any kind of development or any project, so that it does not create further tensions in that particular country or area. Thank you.
Thank you. It's been a really very good opportunity to, I will later introduce myself. It's a very good opportunity to be here today in front of such audience and guests. This is Kia. I'm working in an international organization, which is a Swiss organization. Its name is Hexipar. And here is a special guest, His Excellency Mr. René Holenstein, who has been with our team. Last May 15 to 16, he had been in our working area. So I would rather like to focusing on that working context that need to be shared here with this audience. His Excellency were in our field. We are actually working for the marginalized people. That also Mr. MP Saber Hossain Chowdhury and all other distinguished guests are discussing on here for the democratic practices and the SDGs connection. The vulnerable people should not be left behind. We are working for plainland ethnic minority and the caste-based discriminated people, that's we call them as Dalit. So in our long year of working experiences, we find that they are living the very miserable life and not considered as a human being. So my point is that here, to bring them into the light or bring them into the light of SDG, there should be some affirmative action which come under into the useful policies and the strategy should be there for them, especially to address their attention. As we already say, Mr. Saber Hossain Chowdhury already addressed that. In the budget, we could already notice that there are no so much allocation or such kind of attention for this kind of people also. And His Excellency is here, and I want to keep him in attention that he has been already the witness of that miserable people. So I do appeal with the soft corner of the heart that people should be come into under SDGs light, wherever we are talking about what type of democratic practices are suitable for achieving the SDGs. Because a person who are a human being is not considered as a human being is a loss of a great democratic practices. Thank you everyone for listening my point. Thanks.
Thank you. Let me just very quickly before I leave, and I know it's rude that I'm leaving early, but I have warned you that I will. Dr. Atiq Rahman makes a very important point, and I think this needs to be followed up. You know, the traditional school of thought is that environment and economic growth don't always go together. I think this is a very, very important point. But I think now we have reached the point, because of advances in technology, because of greater financial resources being available, that we don't necessarily see this as mutually conflicting. I think what we need now in this equation is political wisdom. And of course, it doesn't happen, it doesn't help if, you know, one of the largest democracies in the world and the head of that denies climate change, for instance, or the science of climate change. So I think what we need to do now is not look at environmental degradation and then we say that, okay, economic development, no. I think the two can now coexist, and we have reached that point. And it'll be interesting to see what people have to say. With regard to, you know, whether we are trying to harmonize democracy, I think what we are trying to do is we are trying to secure consistency in terms of what democracy delivers. I think that is more important. So rather than look at the front end of the process, as I've said, it's important for democracy to sustain that it actually delivers. And of course, the most, you know, I've said, the spirit of the SDGs is leave no one behind, which means that you have to start with those who are really at the bottom. And that is not very easy, because that needs political will. Of course, it needs advocacy in terms of the members of parliament. And I think we have to try and look at the budget and also what the government is doing, not just in terms of how many of the SDG goals are mentioned, but to what extent we are able to integrate the SDGs into the 5-year plans. I mean, now we are on the last year of the 7th 5-year plan. So I think the next one is going to be very critical, because then we are going to be like just 5 years away from the SDGs coming to an end. Thank you.
This is Masroor Shakil, senior reporter of Channel I. I have a straight question to Peter, the keynote speaker. Peter, keynote speaker, and the political scientist Rounaq Jahan. Do you think Bangladesh now practicing ideal form of democracy to achieve SDG when we have very united parliament with an omnipotent prime minister? In fact, our parliament is so powerful now, which rhetorically can transform male to female and female to male. We are a very consistent GDP-led economic growth, and apparently, and there is no dissident voice in the society at all, and as well as in the parliament also. So according to you, as your last slide said, it is not ideal form of democratic practice to achieve SDG goal, though SDG 16's goal is to have strong institution and social justice. Thank you.
Oh. Gotcha. Okay, go ahead. Language of convenience. Je pochondo hoy oই bhasha bole.
Thank you. I'm Zain Khan. I'm the country manager for one of the Australian international NGO, the Fred Wallace Foundation. I'd just like to focus my statement to the topic itself. Before coming here, actually the topic really interested you, and it was very attractive, democratic practices in achieving the SDG goals, and I'm going to focus on that itself only. I thank the speakers because they were quite bold enough to make some bold statements, and we learned a lot from them. When you looked at as Professor Rounaq was saying, it was a presidential form of government, and then we came to parliamentary form of government. In a presidential form of government, it's more of a dictator, because you have a one person's voice with the technocrat ministers. And whereas a parliamentary form of government, you have people's representatives on the parliament. I'm not going to go whether they were democratically elected or not, that's a different topic. But it is a democratic process that has come. So the policies that was adopted and approved within the parliament, it is a democratic way of adopting it, because it was together, and the people who came from different constituencies had their constituencies situation analyzes as well. The problem lies in the implementation. Whether is it going, the policies that has been adopted, is it going to the end users or not? And Professor Rounaq has rightfully informed that it's an SDG goal. Is there a corruption? Is there justice? Is it the rule of law? Whereas in a developed country, it is for all. For us, it is not. And I think that is where we need to concentrate to see whether the SDG goal is being implemented appropriately. You have one element of the SDG goal moving at a faster rate, whereas the other element of the SDG goal lagging behind. Both of these has to go together, or else you'll have a cultural lag. And that is where I think we need to concentrate. Thank you.
First, let me bring them in, then I'll bring you in. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Sarah. I'm a researcher at CPD. I would like to thank Mr. Niggli for his presentation and bringing a topic to the conversation that has that usually becomes an elephant in the room, because I think we are worried about our democracy to the point that we are also sometimes worried to talk about it. I really appreciate how in your presentation your focus was the Swiss government's challenge of achieving the SDGs, not only as a national goal, but also at a global platform. I just have a few points to make in this regard. First of all, I was wondering if the citizens of Switzerland are really sufficiently aware about the SDGs to really make an informed decision or regarding their policies, whether they're aware of the different synergies and trade-offs between the goals. And also, I think the Swiss people generally are performing well in different aspects of the SDGs. So, do the SDGs really resonate with them? And Professor Rounaq Jahan raised a concern, and if that will inform the priorities that the government will set, will it be only informed by the priorities of the citizens within the country or not? Secondly, you mentioned about inequality. There is indeed stark inequality, intra-country inequalities, and not only in terms of their economies, but also a lot of other aspects, especially if you consider the least developed countries who are categorized according to their income, human assets, and vulnerabilities. So I agree with your point that we have to give more voice to the poor countries in different international platforms, but I would suggest also not only poor countries, but also the least developed countries. And the third point I wanted to make was about the Swiss development cooperation. You rightly mentioned that how development aid and foreign aid is important to achieve the SDGs, to achieve all the SDGs. But if you look at the recent trends in the last few years of the official development assistance that the Swiss government provides, it has been, in 2017, it has been the lowest in terms of the OD as a percentage of their gross national income. It was hovering around, I think, somewhere around 0.45%, which is way below the target of 0.7, international target of 0.7%.
And also, if you look at the Swiss ODA going to the different sectors, the share of ODA going to the social sectors has also been declining in the last few years, since 2013. So would you say these trends are a reflection of the Swiss constituency? And if so, then whether that will affect the democracy? I mean, then it might be a challenge to achieve the SDGs through the democratic practice you just mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you. Professor Rehman, then I'll call you.
Thank you, sir. One observation and one question. Mr. Peter Niggli has mentioned about the implementation of the SDGs in Bangladesh, your last question, and I would like to mention that obviously we can discuss about the role of democracy, and there are many questions with regard to the electoral democracy, but what distinguishes also Bangladesh, I think, from many other countries is citizens' involvement in the implementation of the SDGs. I will just mention about two initiatives that our Center for Policy Dialogue has been taking. One is the Southern Voice on Post-MDGs, which is a platform of 50 leading Southern think tanks, which is the initiative is geared towards cross-country learning, best practices, evidence creation in the context of the SDGs. So we are doing research and also raising questions in various global platforms in the context of Goal 17 partnerships. The second initiative is the Citizens Platform for Implementation of the SDGs in Bangladesh. We have 110 organizations which are partners, and CPD is the secretariat of the initiative. And these partners are implementing the various SDGs goals and targets in various ways, particularly focusing on the marginalized group and the issue that was raised with regard to leaving no one behind. And many of our partners are here. For example, we are with Oxfam, we are doing currently a program with regard to local level localization of the SDGs, which is supported by the European Union. I would also like to mention, with taking advantage of the Honorable His Excellency the Swiss Ambassador, currently we are also doing a program with regard to involving the youth in the implementation of SDGs, because we understand that the youth are the major constituency if we really want to have SDGs with the three pillars: economic growth, social inclusiveness, and environmental sustainability. My question to you, Mr. Niggli, is that I think that we understand that the implementation of the SDGs is also dependent. In one country, it is also dependent on the implementation of SDGs in other countries, because it's a global compact. And if we, for example, if you look at just the report submitted by the UN rapporteur just yesterday, he talks about climate apartheid, which means that there will be a lot of migration because of the climate changes, and it will be the rich people who will be able to adjust, and the poor people will not be able to adjust. So I think that it is just not, food security or habitation, but also human rights which will be involved. And there, I think I would like to have your impression with regard to what we are doing with regard to Goal 17. We see that with regard to financing and the other initiatives which need to be taken, we are seeing that the partnerships that were talked about in the context of the SDGs on 25th September 2015, we are not seeing it, and you have mentioned about WTO, for example, and we are not seeing in multilateral organizations initiatives which are geared towards helping the low-income countries in implementing the SDGs. So I see that there is a hypocrisy over there. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Can I speak in Bengali? Thank you, sir. আমার নাম জিয়াউদ্দিন আহমেদ খান। আমি লাইট হাউস নামক একটা অর্গানাইজেশনে কাজ করি। আমার এটার এই আজকের সেমিনারটার অবজারভেশনের ব্যাপারে কিছু বক্তব্য। প্রথমেই হচ্ছে যে এসডিজি ডেমোক্রেটিক প্র্যাকটিসের উপর কিছুটা নির্ভরশীল এখানে দেখা যাচ্ছে। তো আমি বলবো ডেমোক্রেসি নির্ভরশীল এসডিজির উপর। এসডিজি 10 আপনি ইনইকুয়ালিটিজ রিডিউস করেন দেশে, ডেমোক্রেসি মডেল ডেমোক্রেসি আপনি পেয়ে যাবেন। আমরা আমরা সুইজারল্যান্ডের কথা বলছি, পৃথিবীর হাইয়েস্ট স্ট্যান্ডার্ড অফ সোসাইটি যেটা। আর আমি বাংলাদেশে আছি যে সোসাইটিটা একটা কলোনিয়াল থেকে আসছি, পিছন আমার পোস্ট কলোনিয়াল সোসাইটি, পোস্ট ফিউডাল সোসাইটি। এবং এই সোসাইটিতে আমরা যে জায়গায় যেভাবে এগুচ্ছি এবং আমাদের যে ডেমোক্রেসি আছে, আমি মনে করি উই আর ফার বেটার দ্যান দ্য পাকিস্তান ডেমোক্রেসিস এন্ড সাম আদার ডেমোক্রেসিস ইন মিডল ইস্ট এন্ড মিয়ানমার এন্ড আদার্স। আমাদের মৌলিক কিছু সমস্যা যেগুলি এখানে আইডেন্টিফাইড হচ্ছে, অনেকরাই আমরা বুঝছি। আমাদের যদি সাধারণ মানুষকে আমরা ইন্টিগ্রেট করতে পারি, আমার কৃষক, আমার শ্রমিক এবং আমার দরিদ্র জনগোষ্ঠীকে এসডিজিতে আগানোর জন্য আমরা অ্যাচিভ করব গোল। কিছু কিছু ক্ষেত্রে আমরা অ্যাচিভ করেছিলাম, আবার পিছিয়ে যাচ্ছি। হেলথ সাইডে আমরা ম্যাটারনাল মর্টালিটি নামে এসেছিলাম এমডিজির সময়, আজকে আবার 198-এর কাছাকাছি চলে গেছে। এইটা কনসিস্টেন্সি না থাকার কারণ হলো আমাদের কিছু যেগুলি রুলস অফ ল এন্ড আদার থিংস, আমাদের অনেক ল আছে, অনেক কিছু আছে, ইমপ্লিমেন্টেশনের অভাব। তো এখানে আমি ধন্যবাদ দিব প্রেজেন্টারকে, কতগুলি পয়েন্ট উনি এনেছেন এবং বিশেষ করে ওই নাম্বার 10 আনার জন্য ইনইকুয়ালিটি। এবং এখানে অনেকেই বক্তারা যে সমস্ত বক্তব্য দিয়েছেন সবগুলি প্রণিধানযোগ্য, কিন্তু আমার কাছে একটা জিনিস আমি খুব ভালো করে বোঝার চেষ্টা করতেছি, যে লেম্যান হিসাবে মনে করি যে আমাদের কমন সোসাইটি যেটা, যারা ডেমোক্রেসি শব্দের অর্থ অনেকেই বুঝে না, সুইজারল্যান্ডের নাম অনেকেই শুনে নাই, সেই সোসাইটিকে নিয়ে আমাদের কাজ করতে এবং আমরা আগাতে, এবং তারা আগাচ্ছে। কৃষক আগাচ্ছে। সবজির কথা বলেছেন ভাই, যে কতগুলি সবজি দিয়ে তারা একটা সময় তারা নিজেরা বেঁচে থাকার ব্যবস্থা করে। আমাদের মাছ মৎস্য আগাচ্ছে, আমাদের প্রাণী সম্পদ আগাচ্ছে। আমরা কিন্তু এসডিজি অ্যাচিভ করতে পারবো, তবে কথা হলো একটা, ধনী সম্প্রদায় সমস্ত ধন যদি কক্ষিগত না করেন, ইকুইটেবল ডিস্ট্রিবিউশন এসডিজি 10 করেন, বাকি কোনো এসডিজি আপনার লাগবে না, ইউ উইল গেট এ ভেরি গুড সোসাইটি। থ্যাংক ইউ ভেরি মাচ স্যার।
Can I just translate what he has said? Very important points, I think. He has mentioned a number of important points. He said that SDGs are dependent on democracy. This is being discussed, but he also thinks that democracy is dependent on SDGs, because if we implement or achieve many of the SDGs, democracy will come into place. And he also mentioned about integrating the common people into the SDG implementation process, for example, the farmers, workers, and we are lagging behind in many cases, though our common people who are making progress in many cases in agriculture and industries, but if there are huge inequality in the society, and if we cannot address the inequality, that will be a problem. We have been discussing the equal distribution of wealth, so he has emphasized on that. So these are the cracks of the matter which he has put onto the table. Thank you.
Thank you. This is Mahfouza. I work for Oxfam. Thanks to the panelists for bringing the issues of localization of the SDGs and also putting the emphasis on making relationship between citizen and the state. Just to inform you that currently Oxfam, in a partnership with CPD, we are doing one project for the localizing SDG, and what we learned that it's been almost 4 years that we adopted SDGs, but there are still some needs to translate these SDGs in as a process. No, we are still struggling that how to localizing those SDGs, and we found that while doing this project, we found that there are still only 2% local authority they are oriented about the SDGs. So if we want to localize the SDG and take it to the ground level, we found that it is very much important to bringing those people on board and making them aware of the SDGs, and this is why we need more investment for localizing SDGs. And we also found that within our rural system or within our government system, there are less room to incorporate people's voice. So we also need to think about how to make it inclusive and participatory way to make our government accountable in a transparent way. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Rafia Roshan Khan, and I'm working as a program associate in CPD. First of all, I would like to thank Mr. Peter Niggli for his presentation. I found it really interesting to know the challenges and the opportunities that Switzerland has due to its practice of active democracy, and how they are planning to achieve SDGs. I would just like to add one point which Dr. Rounaq Jahan has already mentioned. I would just echo after her that it is definitely time for Bangladesh and other comparable countries to address whether their current practices and steps towards achieving SDGs are democratic enough or not. And one thing is that in order to achieve democracy or participation from the public, data availability is a major requirement, because without data availability and accessibility, it would be very difficult for the general people to build the awareness about the prevailing situation of a country, and in that case, they will not be able to participate in the decision-making processes of the country. I would just like to give a hint about the current data situation of Bangladesh. That is, a few years back, the government of Bangladesh has run a data mapping exercise in order to assess the data availability in light of the SDG indicators, and they found that around 47% of the data required for SDG monitoring and evaluation is unavailable. And recently an SDG tracker has been introduced under the Access to Information law, but still accessibility to disaggregated data remains problematic. And the last point that I would like to make is the transparency of the data is still questionable in Bangladesh, mostly because all the statistical offices have very limited autonomy. So in this kind of data situation, I don't think that a democratic participation, a good participatory level from the general public would be possible. And of course, the data situation is much better than what it used to be previously, but it needs to be even better because we only have 10 years to really achieve what we need to achieve in terms of SDG. Thank you.
Hello. Thank you, Mr. Peter Niggli, for your excellent presentation. You have actually mentioned about some of the challenges for the developed countries. And taking that into account, I would like to actually raise few issues in terms of the development cooperation under SDG 17. Recently, we did one exercise at CPD, and what we have actually noticed here is that engagement of the CSOs and the private sector in terms of the global partnership has been changing, and it has been evolving with the changes in the nature of flow of fund, with the changes in the nature of global partnership. For example, for Bangladesh, it was the CSOs were, before the 2015, put much focus on WTO platforms or the trade-related issues. But more and more, the CSOs are found to be involved more on domestic resources, partnership with the private sector, and other kinds of areas. So there are some changes we are actually observing. But more strikingly, what we are actually observing in recent years is that the flow of fund for the CSOs targeting to Bangladesh, if we exclude the fund flow for Rohingya people, is declining. So that is an important observation that we like to address. While we mention about more flow of fund for implementation of SDGs by the CSOs is required, on the other hand, the fund flow in Bangladesh is rather shrinking and declining. So it is an important contradiction in terms of the global partnership point of view. So I think you could actually take that into account. Another point here is that, of course, it has been mentioned that the more engagement of the CSOs with the government will be required in terms of implementation of SDGs. However, there are allegations that CSO space is being shrinking in Bangladesh in terms of its activities. So how the global development collaboration and cooperation could contribute in terms of enhancing CSO's voice and CSO's activities more targeted to the SDG implementation point of view. My third point is related to the private sector. So this is the first time we observe that private sector is being integrated and involved in terms of implementation of global goals, particularly SDGs. And at the global level, we found that there are numerous initiatives and activities going on through private-public sector collaboration, private sector CSO, CSR-related initiatives, but not so much we observe in the context of Bangladesh. I could actually raise one critical issue which Professor Rehman Sobhan often raised in this context. While the private sector is a major player for implementation of SDG, and you also mentioned about reducing inequality between the countries, how the development cooperation, particularly the Swiss private sector, who are actually working in Bangladesh, particularly related to the global value chains like ready-made garment sector, could contribute in a more equitable manner. And one major issue Professor Rehman Sobhan often mentioned is that whether the global buyers are actually giving decent price or the fair price of the products that they procure from Bangladesh. And that is a major issue increasingly being raised by Bangladesh's manufacturers and workers as well. Because of the low price of the products, workers cannot get the decent wage, and there are other problems. So how this private sector collaboration with regard to global value chain could ensure better price and better terms of trade in the context of Bangladesh. So these are my few points to it. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. This is Mohua. I'm from USEP Bangladesh. Thank you, Mr. Niggli, for your wonderful presentation. And thank you, actually thanks to everyone, but special thanks to Professor Rounaq Jahan for your very insightful speech. I am actually drawing your attention to the slide where Mr. Niggli, you talked about some actions required to achieve some SDGs, and thinking about SDG number 8 that says promote inclusive and sustainable economic growth, employment and decent work for all. And there is a recommendation as well, and that's in the context of Switzerland. In the context of Bangladesh, I'm also thinking of what Mr. Saber Hossain Chowdhury have just said, that more educated you are, the chance of employment will be much less. So thing is that how we can address this big issue of unemployment. In one statistics I have seen that around 2 crore young people are not employed in Bangladesh, which is a big number. If we think about the next generation, if we think about who will take our democracy or our political systems forward. So in that context, I mean, just giving you some examples of the organization I work for. It is called Underprivileged Children's Educational Program, in brief, USEP Bangladesh. So there I have seen that a large number of young people from urban and peri-urban areas, they are coming within the age of 17 or 18 up to say 25, and they are taking technical education, technical training. And the good news is that almost 90 or 95% of them got their jobs in industries, and there is a high demand for them. So I mean, taking this example, so I mean, how can we reform our education arena? That is actually my question to you, Professor Rounaq Jahan. How can you, visualize the education arena of Bangladesh, where we will put our children or our young people for technical education, because through technical education they can get jobs much more easily. But I'm also mindful of the rise of artificial intelligence, but that's a separate discussion. But I mean, to take forward this country, we need academic qualification. However, the present situation, we are seeing that a large number of private universities are growing. I mean, students are coming out with BBA degrees, MBA degrees, not getting a chance of employment. So what is your vision or your suggestions with regards to that? Thank you.
Bringing in everyone around the table, but before I do that, I'll perhaps take one or two more interventions, and then I will give a few minutes to Dr. Zafarullah to say a few remarks, and then perhaps you, and then we'll round it up.
Thank you, sir. I'm Saida Jahan. I'm working as a researcher at Center for Policy Dialogue, CPD. And I'm also working as a researcher in one of the flagship program of Southern Voice, which is on the state of SDGs, where we actually looking into 12 different countries and what are the implication challenges of SDGs in the southern global south. So from that perspective and from that experience, I would like to share, I would like to highlight one of the three central questions of the presenter. And before that, definitely I would like to thank you, Mr. Peter Niggli, for sharing your country experiences with us. It's definitely very profound. And so in your question, you said how to reverse the worldwide ecological degradation. So from the climate change and ecological perspective, you know that it is different from different country perspectives. So in Bangladesh, when we are one of the worst victims of the climate change, so here the democratic practice is less important than, it is more important to have the global partnership and the global assistance when we are the worst victim of the climate change. So I would like to share two information with you that if the current global warming situation persists, then 70% of our total population needs to be reallocated in upcoming years. And in Dhaka, you know, the 80% of the slum migrant people, they have been displaced because of this climate change. So, you know, in this kind of situation, democratic practices could be very difficult because, as you know, that the literacy rate of Bangladesh is only 60%, where in Switzerland it's 99%. So people of Bangladesh are less aware of the consequences of climate change and why these things are happening with them. So in this case of things like ecological change or climate change situation, I think it is more important to build up the global awareness of it, that we are a global partnership and global awareness, and to help these people out from this worst situation. Thank you.
Thank you. Shubha?
Thank you, sir, for giving the floor. I wanted to share my views here because I made a recent research visit to a members of the European Union. So there I met some researchers from Belgrade, Berlin, and Brussels. So I want to share here that whenever we ask some researchers, that my research topic was how to include or how to incorporate common people's voice in the national or global development policies. So these were my questions, and in every places, whenever I was searching for my answers from researchers, they came up with what about your organizational or institutional policies or government institutions in your country, because either the SDGs or the democratic practices, everything is relates to the space of participation for the common people. And in our country, the more dialogues or the more conferences we do, it doesn't matter, because end of the day, to the common people, the SDGs is still an issue of NGOs, because the common people does not have the proper narrative to translate SDGs into their live stream. So NGOs or CSOs are facing difficulties to relate them with their lifestyles, and in every places where Bangladeshi common people are sharing their voice through national policies, those spaces are being captured or being represented by political parties. So political parties actually capture the room for common people's voice, and end of the day, the NGOs or CSOs capture the space for their upgradation or for their knowledge production. But end of the day, the common people are remaining in the gap. So if we have to achieve SDGs or in a participatory process, my observation or my experience was to include common people in any form or in any manner so that they can share their views more effectively. So I will expect if our keynote presenter and Ms. Rounaq Jahan ma'am have their opinion on how to formulate, or is there any new tool that we can use, or is there any new formula that we should implement or we should focus on to include common people to this development stream. Thank you, sir.
SDGs real benefit cannot be achieved unless there is an accountability is established, accountability and democracy. In our constitution, we say, Prajatantrar sab khamotar malik janagon. But what on the other side, whole power is with the executives. All power relates with the executives or in the bureaucracy and centralization. Everybody likes, and the businessman likes centralization. If you have to pay a bribe, pay to 1% or 2%. You have to like 1% orders everything. A rail line been broken, Prime Minister. Somebody is ill, Prime Minister. Everything, every power is concentrated in one place. So our democracies, I think next year we are going to celebrate Bangabandhu's centenary, birth centenary. What is his? It's very difficult in this country to discuss anything outside the government. Recently, Sirajul Alam Khan, a political leader, he wrote a book. Hardly I didn't see anything that he has said against the government, except 2 lines. One line is that he said on the 3rd March of 1971, Sheikh Mujib certainly appeared in the meeting at Paltan, Maidan, and Bangabandhu said, Joy Bangla and Joy Pakistan on 3rd March. This is in the book. Secondly, he said if Bangabandhu would not been in Pakistani jail, probably he could see our independence movement in a different way. Otherwise, nothing is against the one can see. So these sorts of intolerance, when in such an intolerance exists, it's very difficult to achieve anything. So I think really, unless we can discuss the decentralization, I think real democracy cannot be achieved, people's power cannot be achieved, and we are doing all piecemeal. Take the case in the budget. 4 million people will be given pension. Everybody is making claim. How much? 100 Dhaka a month. So these sorts of pension, what can be achieved? Widow pension. All these sorts of things is a piecemeal. So these cannot, I think really real democracies, main thing is freedom of speech, accountability, and we have to talk freely, openly. Otherwise, SDGs, these are all the paperwork. Thank you.
Let me then round up the floor discussion, and we can now invite His Excellency Ambassador Dr. René Holenstein to make a few remarks.
Mr. Chairman of the CPD, Professor Sobhan, distinguished member of the Parliament, Mr. Rashed Khan Menon, distinguished discussants, and dear guests to this CPD roundtable. Usually people expect from an ambassadorial speech nothing much interesting. They think ambassadorial speeches will be very boring. And even more, they mostly come at the end of a roundtable when everybody is already tired. So I thought I would make just some remarks from an ambassadorial point of view, but from a hands-on ambassador's point of view, looking at how SDC, the Swiss Development Corporation, and Switzerland have been working over the last 45 years in partnership with Bangladesh to improve democratic and to bring democratic practices to the country. I thought I would bring some colors to this distinguished audience and not only words. So let me speak through my PowerPoint presentation. 3 points. What is the spirit of democracy? Somebody said recently, Switzerland is the heaven on earth. You are living in the heaven of earth. It's certainly not true when you come from Switzerland and when you are a Swiss citizen. But what makes Switzerland very special is the way we are dealing with political power. We are world champions in fragmenting power, in restraining and keeping a check on power, on controlling power. And it is true, the summits of our mountains are high, but the power lies always at the bottom. There is a bit of power everywhere, but not too much in any place. That is the first point. The spirit of democracy in Switzerland. I think 3 things are very important: power sharing, then consensus finding, and local governance and citizens' participation. About consultation and consensus finding, we always try to associate as many as people as possible into political debates and to political discussions, to be involved in political processes on an equal foot. This is very much important also for the inclusion of linguistic minorities, for example, in our country. The third element, I will come back to it, local governance and citizens' participation, is for us a factor of political integration and of social inclusion. One of the specific elements of the direct democracy is, of course, the right of people to launch an initiative and to have a referendum on political decisions taken by the government and by the parliament. Another specificity is the fiscal decentralization, which exists at the lowest level, which we call the municipal level. So which means the possibility not only to raise taxes at the lowest level, but also to implement development programs, development projects at this level. One other element is important for Switzerland's democracy, and I think for democracy worldwide, A living democracy must allow spaces of protest. I'm looking actually to the media and see youth demonstrations against global warming. And these youth demonstrations and protests will certainly have an influence on our policy. Now, Switzerland and Bangladesh, I said we are enjoying a long cooperation, more than 45 years. Switzerland, in partnership with Bangladesh, have pioneered in democratic practices, who, as it was mentioned this morning, are key enablers of SDGs. Let me give you 3 examples. First example, and I will reinforce things which have been said this morning. Effective, accountable, inclusive institutions, which have to do with SDG 16, local governance, and women's empowerment. My first example comes from Khulna. I visited Khulna a couple of times, and last time I participated in a mothers' club in Khulna, where these mothers, in a project which is implemented by Transparency International and funded by the Swiss, are discussing infrastructure problem at school level. Accountability. They were asking the headmaster to do repairs in this school, to not allow at this school children to be beaten by their masters, by the professors, and also to introduce a school feeding system. So this Mothers Club is putting pressure on the headmaster from the very bottom. So what was mentioned this morning, to hold responsible people to account, is a fundamental democratic principle. It's a democratic principle which helps controlling power, and which helps also introducing different levels and different kinds of power sharing. And it is, of course, an essential piece of SDG 16, which is about building institutions at all levels. The second example, most probably also familiar to some of you, People's Assembly at the UP level. I participated in many of these meetings, and what always strikes me is also the kind of debate which is existing, trying to put on the table issues which are of relevance for the specific UPs, like school, as I mentioned, infrastructure problem, water problems, access to water. These kinds of debate very much remind me Switzerland. I was a member of a local parliament for a couple of years. Peter Niggli was also a member of parliament. We had this kind of discussions also in Switzerland, where the maximum of people's participation is needed to find best suitable solutions. So decentralization and local governance is a laboratory of participative, inclusive action, and is also a key focus of your government and of course also of SDG 16. Last example, women's empowerment. Bangladesh has introduced, I think as one of the first countries in the world, the gender-responsive budgeting. This is unique. I don't think we have it in Switzerland, probably in some parliaments, in some municipal parliaments, probably, but not even that. So you're looking at the budget, disaggregating it in view of what it means from the point of view of gender equality. How are women affected by the measures proposed in a budget? Is it child-friendly, children-friendly? Are these budgets taking care of health care? Are there provisions for education and so on? So this system has also been piloted by SDC program. I come already to the conclusion. I believe in your country there's a wealth of democratic practices. There's an interest and a demand from people to participate in the management of public affairs. When I see the women's movement here, or the land rights movement, there's a real aspiration in this country. But probably what we need to do is to shape this democratic aspiration into rules and regulations and to implement them. Second point, there's a strong ownership for the SDGs. The government has prioritized the integration of SDGs into national plans and policies, and we heard this morning that the challenge will be to integrate SDGs in the next long-term 5-year plan. Third point, essential efforts are needed, particularly on SDG 16. It was mentioned this morning. Institution building is key, and so Bangladesh, as being a signatory of the SDGs, has also committed to the SDGs, as we have committed to SDG 17 and to the rest of the SDGs. So accountable, inclusive, transparent and effective institutions are key to achieve the SDGs, which means a lot of investment also in skills training, in capacity building at the lowest level, and so on. Civil society, and I would like to mention here the CPD, have a very important role to play. Through your dialogue with policymakers and other parts of society, you are helping to integrate, and this was also raised, that was one of the questions here, to integrate sustainable development thinking into the mindsets and the skill sets of young people. And I'm happy also that we collaborate with the CPD on especially the involvement of youth into this dialogue. There is no one-size-fits-all approach to democracy. There are different levels, different models in the world, and we have also heard about that this morning. But let me make one thing clear. There are universal tenets of democratic practices and intrinsic values of power sharing, consensus building, citizens' participation, inclusiveness, gender equality, accountability, transparency, as it was mentioned by Professor Jahan. So democratic principles are thoroughly embedded in the SDGs, and they remain key enablers for SDGs. Regardless of the different type of democratic practice, sustainable development is only possible if fundamental principles of rights, non-discrimination, people's participation and rule of law are respected. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Excellency. It's always a pleasure for an ambassador to take off his ambassadorial hat and to speak as an academic, and we appreciate that. Now, before I ask the chief guest to make the concluding remarks, let me invite the three speakers to briefly respond to some of the issues which were raised in the discussion. Professor Rounaq Jahan.
Thank you. With the chair's permission, let me briefly speak a little bit in Bangla, and I will then very quickly, in half a minute, translate for, I think, only two people here who don't speak or who don't understand Bangla, what I say. আমার জন্য কয়েকটা স্পেসিফিক প্রশ্ন ছিল, আমি প্রথমে সেই স্পেসিফিক প্রশ্নটাতে যাব এবং তারপরে আসলে আমি কি বলতে চেয়েছি আমার মূল বক্তব্যটা আমি একটু বলবো। প্রথম একটা স্পেসিফিক প্রশ্ন এখান থেকে ছিল, যেখানে আমার মনে হয় বলা হয়েছিল যে আমাদের পার্লামেন্ট তো খুবই পাওয়ারফুল। সেখানে আমার যেটা বক্তব্য সেটা হচ্ছে যে পার্লামেন্টে যদি একটা দল এবং কিংবা একটা ব্যক্তির খুব ক্ষমতা থাকে এবং খুব সহজেই বিল পাস হয়ে যায়, সেটাকে আমি খুব একটা পাওয়ারফুল ইনস্টিটিউশন বলে আমি মনে করি না। পার্লামেন্টের যেটা পাওয়ারফুল দেখতে হলে দেখতে হবে যে ওখানে আসলে ডিসকাশন, ডিবেট কীরকম হচ্ছে, স্ট্যান্ডিং কমিটিগুলো ভালো কাজ করছে কিনা। আমরা বহু বছর ধরে যারা আমরা পার্লামেন্ট নিয়ে কাজ করেছি, ইনক্লুডিং মি, আমি বলেছি যে পার্লামেন্টে যেখানে বাজেট ডিসকাশন কোনো কমিটিতে করা হয় না, যেখানে বাজেট মানে 2 সপ্তাহ 1 সপ্তাহে কোনো আলোচনা না করে পার হয়। পৃথিবীতে যেটা আমেরিকার রেভলিউশনে যেটা কথাই হয়েছিল যে নো ট্যাক্সেশন উইদাউট রিপ্রেজেন্টেশন, তার মানে যে যারা রিপ্রেজেন্টেটিভ তাদের প্রথম কাজ হচ্ছে পার্লামেন্টে একটা হচ্ছে বাজেট নিয়ে তারা ভালো আলোচনা করবে এবং এক্সিকিউটিভকে কোনো রিসোর্স দিবে না, যে যদি না পার্লামেন্টের হাতে এই ক্ষমতাটাই সব থেকে বেশি। এর পার্লামেন্টের ক্ষমতা এটা নয় যে আমি চট করে একটা বিল পাশ করে দিলাম। অতএব এই 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 পরীক্ষায় আমাদের কোনো পার্লামেন্ট এখন পর্যন্ত সেটা দেখে আমি বলতে পারবো না যে আমাদের পার্লামেন্ট একটা স্ট্রং ইনস্টিটিউশন। অতএব সেটা হচ্ছে যেটা just for your information, the question was that our parliament is very strong because things can be passed or the leader is very strong. So my answer was that our parliament actually doesn't discuss debate, our committees are not functioning. So to me, a strong parliament means that they can hold the executive into account, and that is how you decide on the strength of parliament. এছাড়া আমার আরেকটা প্রশ্ন ছিল, সেটা হচ্ছে টেকনিক্যাল ভোকেশনাল এডুকেশন নিয়ে এবং আমার মত কি। যেটা আমি বলবো যে হ্যাঁ, ইউরোপের দিকে যদি আমরা দেখি, ওখানে মানে সেকেন্ডারি পর্যন্ত যাওয়ার পরে ওদের একটা ভালো, জার্মানিতে কিংবা অন্যান্য জায়গায় ভালো ভোকেশনাল এডুকেশনের ওরা ব্যবস্থা করেছে এবং সেটা এমপ্লয়মেন্টের সঙ্গে, জব মার্কেটের সঙ্গে খুবই যুক্ত। কিন্তু এখানে আমাদের একটা জিনিস দেখতে হবে, যেমন আমরা টেকনিক্যাল ভোকেশনাল এডুকেশনটা মান বাড়াবো, এই যে 12 আপ টু স্ট্যান্ডার্ড 12, সেইখানের পরে তারপরে যখন ভাগ হয়ে যাচ্ছে আপ টু স্ট্যান্ডার্ড 12-এরও কোয়ালিটি অফ এডুকেশন খুব ভালো করতে হবে, যাতে একটা বেসিক একটা ভালো একটা গ্রাউন্ডিং হয়। এবং সেটা যদি না হয়, এখন পর্যন্ত আমাদের যেটা যেভাবে আপ টু 12 কিংবা যেখানে পড়ছে তাদের সেই জন্য একটা বেসিক কোনো একটা ভালো একটা গ্রাউন্ডিং হচ্ছে না, যার পরে তারা টেকনিক্যাল এডুকেশনে যাবে। অর্থাৎ আমি বলবো যে হ্যাঁ, আমাদের যে এই যে আনএমপ্লয়েড ইউথ, ওই যে টিউনিসিয়াতে তারা মানে সমুদ্রের মধ্যে রয়েছে, তারপরেও তারা অনেক নেগোসিয়েট করছে কি আমরা বাংলাদেশে ফেরত আসবো না। তো বেচারিদের আমাদের মানে যে এই যে মানে যে এডুকেটেড ইউথদের যে আনএমপ্লয়মেন্টের সমস্যা, সেখানে আমি বলবো আমাদের ওদিকে যেতে হবে। আমি অনেকের সঙ্গে কথা বলে দেখেছি, এখন যেমন অনেকগুলো জিনিসে তাদের আপ টু 12 যদি ভালো মানে শিক্ষা না হয়, যারা ড্রাইভিং জানে তারা কোনো ঘুষ না দিয়েই আমি শুনেছি চাকরি পায়। হ্যাঁ, তারপরে হচ্ছে অনেক হেলথ সেক্টরে অনেক নার্সরা এসে যাচ্ছে। আমি জিজ্ঞাসা করেছি তোমরা কিভাবে চাকরি পেলে, কারণ আমি অন্যান্যদের কাছে শুনি যে একটা পুলিশ হতে হলে কিংবা কোনো অফিসে পিয়ন হতে হলে নাকি তাদের কয়েক লাখ টাকা দিতে হবে। তো ওরা বলেছেন যে না, ওখানে একটা মানে যেহেতু গ্যাপ আছে, অতএব ওরা খবর কাগজের একটা বিজ্ঞাপন দিকে ওই দূর থেকে এই সমস্ত এসে তারা চাকরি পেয়েছে। আই এম অল ফর যে আমরা ওখানে যাব, কিন্তু আমি বলবো যে আমাদের যে বেসিক লেভেলটা যেটা করতে হবে সেটাকে স্ট্রং করতে হবে। There was a question on vocational education. So I said, yes, I'm all for vocational education, but up to standard 12. After that, they go in their specialized way. That also, the quality needs to be improved. বেশ কয়েকজনের একটা প্রশ্ন ছিল, সেটা হচ্ছে এই যে পাওয়ার নিয়ে, এবং অ্যাম্বাসাডারও সেটা বলেছে। এখন যে সেন্ট্রালাইজেশন অফ পাওয়ার, ডিসপার্সাল অফ পাওয়ার, এটা নিয়ে আমি বহু বছর জীবনের প্রথম থেকেই, এবং আমার প্রথম বইটা তো আছে, যে আমাদের দেশে পাওয়ার বলতে যেটাকে অনেক সময় বোঝা যাচ্ছে, সেটা ওরা ভাবে যে একটা পাওয়ার একজনের হাতে একটা জায়গায় সেন্ট্রালাইজড করে ফেললেই বোধহয় খুব বেশি পাওয়ার হয়। কিন্তু যদি এই ধরনের ব্যবস্থা হয়, যেটা সুইস অ্যাম্বাসেডরও বলছিলেন, যে পাওয়ারটা অনেক ডিসপার্সড, অনেকখানি থাকবে, কিন্তু সবাই মিলে যদি নাকি মানে তারপরে একটা কাজ করতে পারে, তাহলে ইউ হ্যাভ মোর পাওয়ার ইন দ্য সিস্টেম। এখন আমি যদি ভাবি আমার পুরা পানিটা আমি এই এক গ্লাসে রাখবো, ওই পানি এই একটা গ্লাসেই থাকবে। আর আমি যদি ভাবি যে এইখানের জন্য অ্যাটলিস্ট আমি 4টা 6টা গ্লাস রাখবো, তাহলে এবং এগুলাকে যদি ভাবে আমি পাওয়ার, তাহলে অ্যাটলিস্ট পাওয়ারটা তো বেড়ে গেল। তারপরে হয়তো আমাদের মধ্যে একটা আন্ডারস্ট্যান্ডিং করতে হবে যে আসলে আমরা কে কতটা খাবো কিংবা কিছু। কিন্তু আমাদের দেশে আনফর্চুনেটলি, আমি তো পাকিস্তান দেশ থেকে মানে এটা দেখছি যে এই যে মানে পাওয়ার ভাবতে ওই যে একজন একটা ইনস্টিটিউশনে পাওয়ার থাকবে, সেন্ট্রালাইজেশন। এবং আমাদের সঙ্গে প্রথমে যে গন্ডগোল মানে আমাদের সঙ্গে যে মানে মেইন কনফ্রন্টেশন পাকিস্তানের সঙ্গে হচ্ছিল, সেটা হচ্ছে পাওয়ার শেয়ারিং এবং সেন্ট্রালাইজেশন, এইটা সমস্যা নিয়ে। অ্যান্ড দ্য সুইস অ্যাম্বাসেডার বললেন যে সুইজারল্যান্ডে ওরা যেটা করছে, পাওয়ারের আন্ডারস্ট্যান্ডিং হচ্ছে একখানে পাওয়ার নয়, চেকস অ্যান্ড ব্যালেন্স অফ পাওয়ার এবং ডিসেন্ট্রালাইজেশন অফ পাওয়ার। আমরা বহুদিন ধরে যারা, এবং ডক্টর তোফাইল রেনে সারাক্ষণই কথা বলেন, আমরা এখানে বিশেষ কিছু আগাতে পারিনি। দিস ওয়াজ দ্য কোয়েশ্চেন অ্যাবাউট সেন্ট্রালাইজেশন অফ পাওয়ার অ্যান্ড পাওয়ার শেয়ারিং। আমাকে একজন জিজ্ঞাসা করছিলেন, আমার মনে হয় শুভ্র এখান থেকে সিপিডি, যে আমার কোনো পিপলস ভয়েসের জন্য কোনো নতুন ফর্মুলা দিতে পারি কিনা। সেখানে আমাদের দেশে বিশেষ করে এই যে আমাদের কেয়ারটেকার সিস্টেমটা, যেটা আমরা আমাদের এখানে আমরা ইন্ট্রোডিউস করলাম, তারপরে ওটার যে সমস্ত ডিস্টরশন হতে থাকলো, সেই সব দেখার পরে আমি এখন কোনো নতুন ফর্মুলা দিতে আমার খুব মানে একটা উদ্বেগ হয়। কারণ আমি একটা ভালোভাবে একটা ফর্মুলা দিলাম, কিন্তু তারপরে অনেক লোক সেই ফর্মুলাটিকে কত রকম ভাবে ডিস্টর্ট করা যায় সেটা আরম্ভ করে দিল, যেটা আমার মাথায়, আমি যেহেতু ভালোভাবে ভেবেছি, এটা আমার মাথায় ঢুকে নাই। তা এখন আমি বলবো, তার মানে কি কোনো নতুন ফর্মুলার কথাই আমরা চিন্তা করব না? না, আমাদের চিন্তা করতে হবে, যেটা এনশিওর করতে হবে সেটা হচ্ছে একটা ফ্রি ডিসকাশন এবং ডিবেটের একটা জায়গা আছে কিনা। যে যদি নাকি মনে হয় এই ফর্মুলাটা কাজ করছে না, তাহলে আমাদেরকে বলতে হবে এটা এই কারণে কাজ করছে না, এটাকে একটু রিফর্ম করা দরকার, অন্য আরেকটা কথা চিন্তা করা দরকার। কিন্তু এটা যদি হঠাৎ করে বলা হয় যে না, আর এটা নিয়ে আলোচনা করাই যাবে না, তাহলে তো আর জীবনে কোনো কিছু নতুন কিছু করবার আর কোনো সুযোগই থাকলো না। অতএব আমি বলছি যে এখন আমি যেটাই আমি একমাত্র বলবো যে হ্যাঁ, আমি যেটা আগেও আমার বলেছি যে 2009 সালের পর থেকে ক্রমাগত আমাদের এখানে যে আর নতুন কি করা যায়, আমাদের সমস্যাগুলো তো একদম পাহাড়ের মতন বেড়ে যাচ্ছে, সেটা নিয়ে যে একটা ফ্রি এনভায়রনমেন্টে গুড ইন্টেনশন নিয়ে দেশপ্রেম সবার মধ্যে আছে, এটা ভেবে যদি আমরা আলোচনা করতে পারি তাহলে ঠিকই আছে। এবং অনেকের মাথায় অনেক কিছু হয়তো মানে এটা ত্রুটিটাও ধরা পড়ে না, বাট উই নিড টু হ্যাভ দ্যাট এক্সচেঞ্জ এবং ডিবেট। এবং আমি বলবো যে সেটা মানে আমাদের করতে হবে, কারণ আমাদের তো এমন অবস্থা কখনোই হবে না যে ইনোভেশন বন্ধ হয়ে যাবে, পরিবর্তন বন্ধ হয়ে যাবে, সব উইজডম আর এর বেশি নেই, এরকম তার কখনো হবে না। অতএব এটা নিয়ে আমাদের ইনোভেশন যদি আমরা রাখতে চাই, তাহলে সেটা আমাদের রাখতে হবে। সবার শেষে আমি দুটো কথা মানে বলতে চাই। যেহেতু আমি রিসার্চার এবং সিপিডিও একটা মানে গবেষণা বেসিসে পলিসি অ্যাডভোকেসি করে, সেই জন্য আমি যেটা বলবো যে ভালো রিসার্চ করতে হলে সেটার জন্য যেটা দরকার, প্রথম হচ্ছে যে একটা যে তথ্য যেটা আছে সেটা খুব নির্মোহভাবে অবজেক্টিভভাবে তথ্যটা তুলে আনতে হয়, এবং তারপরে এবং যাতে সেই তথ্যটা নিয়ে যে একটা গোজামিল যাতে সেটার মধ্যে না থাকে। এবং সেটা করতে গেলে এবং অনেক তথ্য যদি আমাদের নিতে হয়, গবেষণা যদি করতে হয়, তাহলেও যে ডেমোক্রেটিক একটা এনভায়রনমেন্টের দরকার, যে তথ্যটা হয়তো কারো পক্ষে যেতে পারে, বিপক্ষে যেতে পারে, কিন্তু যে তথ্যটা আনছে তাকে যেন কোনো ঝামেলায় না পড়তে হয়। ইংরেজিতে কথা আছে যে শুটিং দ্য মেসেঞ্জার, হ্যাঁ, ওই ধরনের যাতে নাকি একটা ঝামেলায় না পড়তে হয়। এখানে আমি বলবো যে আমাদের দেশে এমনি তথ্য তোলা, এবং বিশেষ করে আমরা আজকে যেহেতু ডেমোক্রেসি নিয়ে কথা বলছি, রাজনীতি নিয়ে কোনো গবেষণা করা এবং সেটার থেকে তথ্য আনা খুবই মুশকিল। আমি যে 70 সাল থেকে আমি দেশে কাজ করছি যে রাজনীতি নিয়ে, এবং আমাকে প্রত্যেক রেজিমেই আমি দেখেছি যে এই তথ্য আনতে গেলে আমার যদি আমি সার্ভে করতে চাই, আমার রিসার্চের পিছনে পুলিশ লেগে যায়, এই সে তারা প্রশ্ন করতে পারে না। অথচ পৃথিবীর সব দেশে আমরা যদি নাকি রাজনীতি নিয়ে যদি একটা ভালো করে আলোচনা যদি হয়, আসলে তথ্য উঠে আসে, শেষ পর্যন্ত সেটা সবারই কাজে সেটা লাগবে। এবং এই জন্য আমি আমার বক্তব্যে আমি যেটা বলেছিলাম যে এসডিজি, এবং যেখানে আমার ডক্টর তোফাইলের সঙ্গে আমার যেখানে দ্বিমত, যে আমরা যদি আসলে এসডিজি অর্জন করতে চাই, তাহলে যদি 16 নম্বর এসডিজিটার আমরা যদি না করি ঠিক মতন ভাবে, তাহলে কিন্তু আর অন্য এসডিজিগুলাও আমরা অর্জন করতে পারবো না। যেমন এখানে আবার তথ্যের দিকে আমি যাই, যদি বলা হলো যে হ্যাঁ আমরা এগুলো অ্যাচিভ করেছি, কিন্তু আসলে তথ্যটা ঠিক হলো না, তাহলে তো আমরা কি করে অ্যাচিভ করেছি এটাই তো তখন মানে অ্যাকসেপ্টেড হবে না সেখানে। এবং যেহেতু আমরা এখানে আমি বলবো যে অনেক ডোনারদেরও যে একটা রোল আছে, আল ফিনিশ, যে আসলে ফান্ডিং আমাদের দেশে বাইরে থেকে যখন আসে আমি দেখেছি যে সেটা মানে অর্থনীতি নিয়ে কাজ করতে হলে সেখানে হয়তো ফান্ডিং আসে, কিন্তু কেউ যদি মানে রাজনীতির জিনিস নিয়ে সরাসরি গবেষণা করতে চায় সেখানে কোনো ফান্ডিং আসে না। এখন আমাদের দেশের সরকার থেকেও এটা নিয়ে কোনো ফান্ডিং থাকে না, কিংবা সব থাকলেও হয়তো বা যে ফান্ডিং দিচ্ছে ভাবছে যে রেজাল্টটা তার পক্ষে যাবে, সেরকম ভাবে তো রিসার্চ করা যায় না। অতএব এবং তাতে করে যেটা হয়েছে, এই সমস্ত তথ্যের উপরে ভিত্তি না করে আমাদের দেশের রাজনীতি কিংবা ডেমোক্রেসি নিয়ে কথাবার্তা শুধু টিভি টক শোতে এবং একটা পক্ষ এবং আরেকটা পক্ষের মধ্যে একটা সামটাইমস সিভিল এবং সামটাইমস একটা আনসিভিল ডিবেটে চলে যাচ্ছে। অতএব আমার সবার শেষে আমি যেটা বলতে চাই সেটা হচ্ছে এই যে আসলে আমাদের দেশে আমরা যদি যে কোনো জিনিস আমরা যদি এগিয়ে নিয়ে যেতে চাই, সেটা এসডিজি হোক, যেটা ডেমোক্রেসি হোক, ফ্রি প্র্যাকটিস হোক, সেখানে যাতে নাকি রিসার্চ এবং ডেটা কালেকশন, অ্যানালিসিসের ফ্রিডম, সেটার প্রকাশ করার ফ্রিডম, ডিসকাশন এবং ডিবেট, সেইটার যাতে অ্যাটমসফিয়ার থাকে, এবং সেটার জন্য আমাদের সবারই আমার মনে হয় কাজ করতে হবে। Let me just conclude by just giving you what I said. I said my final plea is that I am a researcher myself, and CPD is a research-based advocacy institution, that it is very important to collect data in a very objective way, and then to have analysis and atmosphere and environment for free discussion. Unfortunately, from my experiences of being a researcher in Bangladesh from the 1970s, I have seen it has been very difficult to conduct research, to get funding for research on political topics or on democracy. So you just have impression-based opinions on TV talk shows, mostly between partisan people, but you need facts. And so even donor agencies are ready to give funding for projects on economics or so, but not really for research. So as a researcher, my plea is that we need to have, really we need to work and have support for research and data collection. Thank you very much.
A few brief remarks.
I don't have much to say. What Professor Rounaq Jahan said disagree with me. Actually, I agree with her, because that's what I wanted to say as well. Only Mr. Saber Chowdhury disagreed that 16 is not the only important number of, 16 is not only the goal. Other composite way, it has to be addressed. So I agree with Professor Rounaq Jahan. The 16 is a key goal to achieve, and maybe we can achieve all according to data and information, but 16 needs qualitative change, the society transformative agenda, 16. So that is very important, and that's very crucial. Two of the speakers from this side, they supplemented me, not directly questioned. One, I appreciate that Oxfam is doing a study. I don't know what type of study they're doing it, but localization of MDG SDG. We did some work on the localization of MDG, but we could not do much breakthrough. But we tried with at least 100 Upajala Parishad and 200 Union Parishad. So that experience may be shared. And then another lady from this side also, she categorically mentioned about the deficit of data or distortion of data or problem of getting real data. That's what I tried to say. The way we sometimes present the data and analyze the data, those data bases are very weak. It's happening for a long, long time and gradually it's not improving. That was the anxiety and worriness. So data collection, data analysis, it needs a lot of autonomy for the organizations who are collecting data and also researchers. Without fear and favor, researchers have to speak their mind. That's what is very essential. Thank you very much, sir.
Okay, but now I have much pleasure in inviting our chief guest, Mr. Rashed Khan Menon, to make his concluding remarks.
My respected teacher, but for whom I just could pass complete my MA degree, and also for whom I'm in politics as of today, because he, at that time, he handed some of his students questions about two economy, about the disparity between East Pakistan and West Pakistan. We asked to the then Foreign Minister of Pakistan, Mr. Manzoor Qadir, who came to visit and give lecture in Dhaka University. And we asked those questions about two economy, and the thing started, the movement of 62 anti-martial law movement against Ayub regime. So thank you, sir. And sir, I would like to say that I'm still trying to continue your part that you said about two economy. Now we find in Bangladesh not two economy, of those they're between two areas. It is two economies between the rich and the poor in the main, what you have said recently. And also not only one society, multiple society because of the education system. Because of the education system, the society is totally divided into many sections. Sir, you have correctly said that I have seen both the sides of the fence. I really experience, I have an experience of to be in the social welfare ministry. I try to expand the social safety net, but what I found out is that we could give those people some entity, but not real entity of to be in the mainstream of the society. They are getting some bhatas or contributions as a dole, but not to live like a real man in the society. It is also for the disabled also. Sir, the main theme of the SDG, as I could understand, is that nobody is to be left behind. But if we see the discussions in our parliament and also the budget that was placed in the parliament, we can see that many of the people and most of the people are left behind and would be left behind because of the whole system. The budget, I told about the budget, about the growing inequality. The wealth is being concentrated in the hands of few, very few, not only few, very few. And the wealth of the poor is getting depreciated every year. So I said in the parliament that this is a system. Of course, I tried to follow the utterances of Mr. Stiglitz and Mr. Paul Krug about the American economy of the 1%, for the 1%, and by the 1%. Now I said that our economy is 45% of the 5% and by the 5%. And I would agree with Mr. Ziauddin, if the SDG is implemented really with the inclusion of the peasants, workers, and the down-to-people, democracy would be really meaningful for all in this country. The parliament that we have, I would like to say that they don't discuss about the real issues about the poor people. There was a research paper by Dr. Salahuddin of Dhaka University. In that, there are only 3 minutes are given for the poor people in the parliament every day in the discussion. And the other discussions are about other things, mainly about just saying, what you can say, that utilizing the leaders of the parliament, whether of the opposition or of the opposition. This is what this parliament is really. That I'm just confessing myself. About Dr. Tofail's the question about SDGs localization, I would definitely say that unfortunately our local government still could not work after so many years. We had so many commissions about the local government. Dr. Tofail, I think you remember that I was there in those commissions also. I tried to put my views in those commissions. But unfortunately, the bureaucracy and also the member of parliaments wouldn't allow the real power to be devolved to the local governments. So local governments are not really functioning. And with the election system, which is now prevalent, the local government has become really dysfunctional. About the political reform, which Professor Rounaq Jahan has said, we promised to our people about these political reforms. If you remember, in the three-party alliances declaration of 1990, through which we overthrew the Assad military regime, we promised about the political reform. Also, during the during the BNP Jamaat rule, when the 14-party alliance was formed, in the 23 point of 14 parties, we talked about the political reforms. But unfortunately, we could not do anything about it. And I would say that that is, of course, from the political parties we might have failed, but also from the civil society and from the academics, there is not much pressure about the issues. About the proportional representation, we are talking about it for a long time. We represented the Election Commission, I think in 1992, in 1994, and also every year we put these issues to the Election Commission. And the Election Commission would always say this is a political decision. But about the proportional representation, unfortunately, the opinion that should have been built up in this country is not there. That's how we are failing, everybody is failing. And I would say that now there is this link between the politicians and the academics. Professor Rehman Sobhan, Professor Nurul Islam, and other professors who pioneered those movements in those days of Pakistan days, they put the things to the politicians, and there was a close relation between them. But unfortunately, because of the changing world, the changing system, because of the prevalence of the, I'm sorry to say about the, I would not say that the relevance is not there, but about the prevalence and the, what you can say, the apparent of the NGOs and others. Now there is a complete division between the politicians, the academics, and the NGO field also. So what I would like to point out here, about the SDG, if you want to really fulfill, yes, the CPD has definitely made a forum. I heard about the CPD's forum. I tried to follow their literatures. Also, other organizations are doing that. And also the government is also trying to doing that. They have formed a separate, what you can say, separate office in the Prime Minister's office with a coordinator who is very powerful. And also every ministry has got focal point officers about the SDGs, and every ministry has to fulfill some targets about the SDGs. But my understanding about the SDGs is that we could not do much about it because our people are still lagging behind. They are being left behind in the budget. They are being left behind in the developmental process. There is a debate here about the development and democracy. I would say that these two should go together. Without having this development and democracy going together, our development would not mean anything to our people. Yes, we have got a fantastic growth rate. ADB, World Bank, has everybody appreciated our growth rate, but the growing inequality and the concentration of wealth in some hand, and also the decision-making power into very small group of people, has become really dangerous for the democracies flourishing in Bangladesh. So SDG would not work unless these two can be harmonized and we can go together. So thank you very much. I came here to learn and enrich myself, and I'm enriched by the presentation of Mr. Niggli about the SDG, particularly the experience in the Switzerland, and about from His Excellency the Ambassador. He has definitely, with his experience in working in Bangladesh, has said something which is very, very important. Sir, thank you very much, and thanks for giving me this opportunity to talk. Thank you very much.
Now let me give Mr. Peter Niggli the last word to respond to all the observations and comments which have been made, which has been stimulated by his opening presentation.
Thank you. I will not respond to every question. Otherwise, we sit here for the next 2 hours. I want to conclude with the following. Usually, I mention Bangladesh in Switzerland as an example when I speak about climate change. I say the Dutch are preparing billions of investments into their dam system to protect the country against higher sea levels. I say Bangladesh is in a much more delicate situation than the Netherlands. I don't know if your government is preparing something, but I know that there is no international rush to come to help and also to give finance for this thing. I'm well aware that in your country, a huge part of the population will finally be negatively affected by climate change. So let's come back to a question which has several times been raised. There is this SDG program, but what about the situation of the international cooperation? Is it ready today and suitable to go ahead with the SDG agenda? SDGs was 2015. Climate Treaty of Paris was 2015. Unfortunately, since then, the international political situation has changed to the worse. We have had Brexit, the European Union is today weakened. The UK is absent, you can't count on it. Its administration will not be able to even make an SDG plan for its own country. You see it in the whole Brexit negotiations. We have the United States, Trump, he left the Paris Treaty. It despises WTO. It despises every other treaty. The United States are bound to a kind of organized international cooperation. So the situation is rather dire, if you ask for that. And where is the money for it? The money for all these partnerships promised is also not around. Some of the European states do well. At least they come up to this 0.7 in development money. Climate finance, nobody does well. Everybody expects the biggest state to give the first adequate pledge. So they expect this or the next year, the climate conference. And up to then, they don't plan adequately. What to do in this situation? We can preach democracy for Bangladesh. We have it in Switzerland. Many other countries have it too. But naturally, this SDG agenda is not the national agenda. It's a global one. If you achieve, but the rest doesn't achieve, you will go under. The same for us. So we are really in a bad situation concerning this. To revert this, to improve or overcome this bad international situation depends, unfortunately, on political changes in single states. So we have to count on Bangladesh and Switzerland. We should count on the electors in the United States next year to chase away this fellow. We should count on many elections in other countries to change the political composition. Actually today, in Switzerland, the media and the government is not really aware of the SDGs. There are some special ministries who know, yes, that exists. But people begins, in Europe at least, to feel the climate change, as you told. A little bit told summers, they feel it. And young children from the age of 12 have come in hundreds of thousands on the streets of Europe since last December. Totally surprising our politicians. These are their children too. Surprising the businessmen, our children, unfortunately. So they feel more pressure. SDGs in Europe for the time being is a public pressure do finally something on climate change. Thank you for this conference, for the invitation. I enjoyed it.
Thank you, Peter, and also for your response and summing up. It's been a very stimulating discussion. I mean, I will not add to it. I will just make a few concluding observations over here. One, of course, is that what is not fully brought out in looking at the general classification of the SDGs is that at the end of the day, they represent two elements or three elements within it. One is, of course, the problems of resource distribution. What element of global and national resources will actually be committed to addressing the problems of the deprived and those who in fact have been left behind. It is an allocative decision, and therefore it is a decision of political economy in terms of the way resources are appropriated. The second issue is the structural aspects of the problem. That at the end of the day, it isn't merely a question of how resources are being distributed budget-wise, how much will go into healthcare, how much will go into safety net programs, how much will go into environment. It's a question of the institutional arrangements which determine the distribution of power and resources in that society, and how far the SDGs are in a position to in fact deal with institutional changes which will rebalance the opportunity structures available to society. It is in this aspect that the SDGs are at their weakest, and in fact have not really been able to correct the limitations which they inherited from the MDG process, that it is essentially a normative agenda built around allocating resources. It has very little to say and certainly very little to contribute to the structural interventions which are really necessary in order to bring about a more egalitarian and inclusive society. The third issue which has to be brought in here is the whole issue of democracy and governance. Now, obviously, there are various components of this incorporated into the relevant SDG numbers as ends in themselves. But of course, it should be kept in mind that the nature of democracy and governance is also instrumental to determining the extent to which and the ways in which the SDGs are effectively going to be implemented. And this aspect of the functioning of the processes of democracy and governance are closely related then to the structures of society which determine how power is allocated and is in fact used to appropriate resources. The problem which countries like Bangladesh are facing is that you are witnessing not just inequalities in income and in social disparities, but you are basically seeing how elites are really appropriating political power. I mean, this is clearly manifest in the composition of parliament. Now, I don't know what are the numerical correlates in Switzerland, but here you will have a situation where close to about 70% or more actually acknowledge in reporting their sources of income that business is their primary source. And the remaining 20 or 25% may probably list it or probably not list it as a secondary source of their livelihood. So that essentially you are seeing democratic institutions subject to elite capture, and not just here, but really in many countries around the region, including in Latin America and sub-Saharan Africa. Now, I do not know whether the European systems have in fact democratized this process. I think one of the advantages of proportional representation as an instrument of representation enables you to then intervene and have a more balanced composition in your legislatures or in your institutions of representative government, whereas when you are operating within a constituency-based first-past-the-post system, the whole dominance of money becomes important. Of course, in the political culture now, the problem is not only that the people with resources get elected, but then they use the elective mandate as a politically instrumental resource to in fact further their business ends, so that in fact rather than using political power as a social objective to the realization of SDGs and other goals, your primary mission tends to be private accumulation or in fact the building up of resources in support of your particular party. So again, these are universal problems over here, and I'm concerned that the global SDG conversation has insufficiently addressed these particular issues. The concluding point I would like to make is the whole nature of the civil society mobilization and the importance of a working relationship between the state and civil society in the realization of SDGs. Now, in quite a number of countries, this has become rather than a collaborative relationship in which you use the resources and strengths of the two communities to then collectively move towards this goal, this has become an adversarial relationship. And this again is a problem that will need to be addressed. Certainly here there are some elements of this adversarial relationship which you have to take into account. It is very important for civil society to not just perform advocacy role, but to also play a mobilizational role in which they serve as the connectivity between the beneficiaries of SDG interventions and the commitment of the state to in fact realize SDG goals. And this of course requires the strengthening of autonomous civil society, not just one driven by access to international resources, but which is intrinsically strong. I remember many years ago, and perhaps it is still active, in India there used to be something known as the Chipko movement, where actually ordinary common people became the protectors of the environment. And when people were coming to cut down forests, these people would actually embrace the trees and actually physically try to protect them from in fact being appropriated by resource-hungry developmentalists and business communities. Now, here and in many countries, the power of business and the force of the market mechanism, which is resource-scarce, land-scarce societies, is in fact leading to increasing appropriation of natural resources. The whole emergence of a Chipko-type movement to protect the environment is simply absent. We are seeing people like Atik and others will know the numbers about the deforestation of Bangladesh, the drying up of our rivers which are being appropriated, the drying up of our water bodies which are being appropriated by construction and development companies, and the complete inability for the victims of these processes to in fact be effectively mobilized to protect this. Here, I think there is a challenge for civil society, but there is a challenge for political society. And obviously, just as some elements of the political process periodically come forward, for example, you will remember in the Fulbaria movement, where in fact elements in the political process, including the Prime Minister's own party and other left parties, played a very active role in preventing the development of coal mining over there with large destructive effects on the environment. We are not seeing any corresponding mobilization where political players are really coming in and addressing other assaults on the environment, so that this is being left to a small minority of the civil society process. Here again, I think representatives in Parliament should in fact actually play a much more active role and should use their voice in Parliament for the protection of the environment. Climate change is obviously partly a nature-driven process, but which is increasingly being aggravated by man-made interventions. But there are a range of interventions which are not even related to the climate, but which are exclusively man-made. And certainly the filling up of our water bodies, the deforestation of limited forest resources would constitute that category. And so here, again, the challenge would be a combined mobilization of both civil and political society to in fact address these issues, because this will be central to the way in which a credible mobilization in support of SDGs and their realization is made. I think this discourse needs certainly to be moved from the realm of, you may say, civil society, domestic and global activism into a major political agenda item over here, in which not just the accessing of resources, but the structural interventions and the democratic mobilizations which are integral to a fundamental transformation both of the global community and national societies behind a major transformative goal like SDGs can in fact become the major mission before all of us in this century. Well, thank you again for Peter, Ambassador Rashed, for being over here.